5:40 here. So this following expert from, I think, the Heritage Foundation. Yes, the Heritage Foundation, Hans von Spakovsky. He's an attorney. He went on Rush Limbaugh's show today to talk about election fraud. So here he is on Mark Levine's show.
If this isn't done right, if it's not done by the book, not about counting every vote, it's about upholding the Constitution, upholding state laws, decision by state legislatures, and so forth. If this isn't done right this time, even though it impacts this presidential election, we're going to have a disaster every 4 years. And it's going to get worse and worse with litigation, with courts interfering with state legislatures, with violations of deadlines, with other parties not being able to be present when there's counts taking place. This stuff needs to be resolved now, does it not?
Yeah, it does. Look, I would compare this. I mean, to give you a simple comparison. Look, no, everyone would agree that in the middle of the Super Bowl, you know, one of the coaches for one of the teams should not go to the referee and say, listen, we need to change the rules applying to the current game. And that's exactly what has happened this year in the election process. We had lawsuits filed all over the country, and we had judges, both state court judges and federal judges, trying to change the rules, not just before the election, but in the middle of the election when the voting had already started early and through absentee ballots across the country, and relaxing, quite frankly, the needed rules to maintain the security, for example, of absentee ballots. And that is just not the way you conduct an election. It's dangerous.
It's appalling. There's really two things here. Number one, the U.S. Supreme Court so far has failed to uphold the federal Constitution, and in doing so, put an end to some of these activities that are going on that benefit one party against another. It's really appalling. And until the Supreme Court steps in and puts its foot down and upholds Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, and upholds it without any ambiguity, this is going to continue, and it's going to raise questions about elections. But here's the other problem, or the second problem, Hans, and that is this. If you can't trust the numbers that are coming out in one state or another, or in one city or another, then the legitimacy of the presidency is on the line each and every time, is it not?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
Yeah, and so we're all being told now to unite, to unite. I'm very troubled by the strategy that was put in place here. It's obviously a long-term strategy by the Democrat Party, and I'm also very troubled by the fact there was almost no reporting on it up till a few weeks ago, or maybe even a few days ago. And even now, there's almost no reporting on it, the effect that this had on the outcome of the election. No?
No, I mean, look, you're exactly right. And just keep in mind, Mark, that all of the measures that were asked for in those lawsuits to basically get rid of the safety protocols for absentee ballots, you know, all of them were in H.R. 1. That was the first bill that Nancy Pelosi introduced in the House 2 years ago when they took over the House. That bill would have put all of these terrible measures in place, forced them on states across the country. So this is not just a short-term strategy. This is a long-term strategy. They want to change federal law to micromanage and take over the running of elections by the states, and do it in a very bad way.
And the amazing thing is, in this provision of the Constitution we keep talking about,
right,
there's only one body mentioned as the body that has the say, the beginning say and the final say, and it's the state legislature, and they're being pushed aside for the state courts. They're being pushed aside by the boards of elections. They're being pushed aside by the governors. And then when you dare to raise it and say, wait a minute, full stop, the state legislature gets to decide how the electors are chosen, you're accused of trying to oppress, suppress, racism, disenfranchisement, and all the usual pablum that we get from the left. Now, on another topic, but it's very important, we now see individuals saying we need to keep a list of people who have been associated with this administration, almost an enemies list. You've seen it by AOC. You've seen it by Jennifer Rubin. What do you make of this?
Well, in fact, Jennifer Rubin put out a tweet saying not only there should be a blacklist of everyone who's associated with the campaign, she also wants a blacklist of anyone who talks about what we've talked about today, which is if you talk about election fraud, you should be on that blacklist. And she calls for anyone like that to be exiled from society and to not be given a job in the government, in academia, and in private industry. I'm just wondering, have they picked the location yet for the gulag or detention camp where I'm going to be sent for talking about this kind of thing?
And she, of course, is a whack job, but nonetheless a columnist, in my opinion, for the Washington Post, where I'm sure she'll be forever. Why don't they pick some of those sites where FDR rounded up Japanese Americans of Japanese descent? I suppose they could send us there. I know they loved FDR. Hans von Spakovsky, I want to thank you, my friend, and be well.
Okay, so this guy is the front man for many of these allegations about voter fraud. So exactly how credible is this guy? Because he's been doing this for about 20 years. He is an attorney, and he's been leading the way with the Heritage Foundation, warning about rampant fraud in our voting system. And how credible is this guy? There was the first person, Rudy Giuliani, the attorney for President Donald Trump, called up as a witness to allegations of vote counting shenanigans in Philadelphia during a press conference on Saturday, is a sex offender who for years has been a perennial candidate in New Jersey. So we're talking about Darrell Brooks, who said he was a GOP poll watcher. And he said this at a press conference held Saturday at Four Seasons Total Landscaping in Northeast Philadelphia. He was incarcerated in the 1990s on charges of sexual assault, lewdness, endangering the welfare of a minor for exposing himself to two girls ages 7 and 11. And this is the first guy that Rudy Giuliani had speak at this press conference at the Four Seasons Landscaping. Four Seasons Landscaping is a registered sex offender who was exposing himself, convicted of exposing himself to girls. So when Republicans cry about voter fraud, they're not sending their best. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they bring their problems with them. They bring crime. They're rapists. And some, I assume, are good people. I assume. Certainly want to believe that some of them are good people. So is Hans von Spakovsky, is he a good person? Is he a credible source?
This guest is a constitutional and election law expert as well.
He's a constitutional and election law expert. I mean, this sounds credible. And he's got a really good job. He's got a think tank. He's with the Heritage Foundation.
Spakovsky. Hans, how are you, my friend?
Mark, I'm doing great.
Hans is senior legal fellow of the Heritage Foundation. Before that, he was a commissioner for the Federal Election Commission. He was counsel to the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the National Department of Justice in charge of enforcing voting rights laws. Who better to have? Hans, hundreds of lawsuits were brought prior to this election, the vast majority of which were by the Democrat Party or Democrat Party surrogates.
Right.
Hundreds of them. Number one, have you ever seen anything like this before? And number two, what was the purpose of these lawsuits?
No, it was unprecedented. I've never seen so many lawsuits filed before Election Day, and all the lawsuits had a common theme. They all tried to get the security protocols that are in place for absentee or mail-in ballots eliminated. You know, they wanted to get rid of, for example, witness signature requirements on absentee ballots. They wanted to get rid of signature comparison for absentee ballots when election officials compare the signature on the ballot with the signature on file for the voter. They tried to implement vote harvesting in every state. So states that banned vote harvesting, in other words, strangers and being able to come to your front door to pick up ballots, they wanted that overwritten. In Alabama, which has a voter ID law that applies to absentee ballots, they tried to get the courts to basically say they couldn't apply that ID law to absentee ballots either. So everything they did was intended to get rid of any of the protections and measures put in place by states to try to prevent fraud in the use of absentee ballots.
And they succeeded in many respects in states like Pennsylvania and other states, didn't they?
Yeah, they sure did. I mean, the order by the Pennsylvania court was really bizarre in many aspects, telling the election officials there that they couldn't reject a ballot if the signature didn't match. They couldn't reject a ballot even if there's no postmark on the envelope to indicate it's been voted by Election Day, and then extending the deadline past the deadline set by the state legislature.
Let's again take Pennsylvania as an example, although it's not the only example.
Okay, so this guy is one of the apparently the Republicans' A team on the issue of voter fraud. So how much credibility does he have? And unfortunately, the answer is not much. So back in 2009, he claimed that 1,400 votes, 4 times the margin of victory that cost Norm Coleman his Senate seat in Minnesota, were cast by ineligible prisoners in this 2008 Minnesota race for the U.S. Senate that was won by Al Franken. But his statistics were labeled fraudulent by the Hennepin County attorney who investigated the matter. So von Spakovsky and the Heritage Institute maintain a database of voter fraud. And over the past 20 years, how many instances have they been able to document of voter fraud? About 1,600. That's it. In the approximately 20 years they've been maintaining this database, they've come up with 1,600 instances. Now, to support his claims about the wide extent of voter fraud, he cites a year 2000 investigation by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which purported to find 5,400 instances of deceased people in Georgia voting in the last 2 decades. But the Journal-Constitution later revised its findings, noting it had no evidence of a single deceased person voting, and the vast majority of the instances were due to clerical errors. So over the weekend, you might have heard a lot about this sinister Dominion software, which was supposedly changing votes from Trump to Biden. Well, it turned out, as yet, there's nothing sinister about the software. This was human error. We have no evidence yet that there's anything particularly sinister about the software. So what's going on in Georgia? Let me play a press conference from today. A lot of people believe in that system now. And what I don't like is people out there trying to undermine this system that was put together so hard by the Secretary's office,
and those county elections directors. Now, let me be perfectly clear on another point. We are going to find that people did illegally vote. That's going to happen. There are going to be double voters. There are going to be people who did not have the qualifications of a registered voter to vote in this state. That will be found. Is it 10,353? Unlikely. But every election, as I've said, I think every day at this podium, is imperfect. The issue now is, with margins, we are the winner for the closest in the country at 0.2%. When the margins are this tight, every little thing matters. So this office will thoroughly investigate, and we will work to find ways. We know the system counted properly. We know the ballots that were there were counted properly and correctly. We know that. We're going to have an audit to prove it, and it looks like more than likely the president will ask for a recount to reaffirm that. But on the front end, we need to make sure that the absentee ballot process is as tight as it can be so we can stop illegal voting and prevent double voting now and in the future. So with that, I'll take any questions y'all might have.
You addressed several issues. One I wanted to bring up, U.S. Representative Doug Collins alleged there was ballot harvesting. Have you seen any ballot harvesting? I know what he's talking about.
We have not seen that at this time, but I do believe we have some reports of it, so our investigators would likely be looking into it, but I don't have specific information at this time. Yes. Either one. Y'all decide. Okay, so with 47 having certified so far, it means we have 112 more to go, which is not insignificant, and some of them are the larger counties, but we have some of the larger counties in this. Richmond's already certified, Muskogee's already certified, so we already have some of the larger counties in here, but it will be a process as they continue to wrap up the final pieces of the provisionals. We feel like most of the uploads were already done over the weekend, and now you'll find the ticky-tacky things where they do their reconciliations and make sure that, yes, we've got all the ballots to be uploaded. So that's what happens first. So we're trying to move them as fast as they can in certification so that we can do our risk-limiting audit and know the decision has not been made as to which race will be done on.
So none of the major Republican politicians have apparently congratulated Joe Biden for winning as president, and that includes Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
And then there's the presidential race. Obviously, no states have yet certified their election results. We have at least one or two states that are already on track for a recount. And I believe the president may have legal challenges underway in at least 5 states. The core principle here is not complicated. In the United States of America, all legal ballots must be counted. Any illegal ballots must not be counted. The process should be transparent or observable by all sides, and the courts are here to work through concerns. Our institutions are actually built for this. We have the system in place to consider concerns, and President Trump is 100% within his rights to look into allegations of irregularities and weigh his legal options. Let's go back 20 years ago. 20 years ago, when Florida came down to a very thin margin, we saw Vice President Gore exhaust the legal system and wait to concede until December. More recently, weeks after the media had called President Bush's reelection in 2004, Democrats baselessly disputed Ohio's electors and delayed the process here in Congress. In 2016, election law saw recounts or legal challenges in several states. If any major irregularities occurred this time of a magnitude that would affect the outcome, then every single American should want them to be brought to light. And if Democrats feel confident they have not occurred, they should have no reason to fear any extra scrutiny. We have the tools and institutions we need to address any concerns. The president has every right to look into allegations and to request recounts under the law.
The position is clear. We want to protect the franchise of the American people. We want an honest, accurate, lawful count. We want maximum sunlight. We want maximum transparency. We want every legal vote to be counted and we want every illegal vote to
Whoa. I just think we have to be very clear. She's charging, the other side is welcoming fraud and welcoming illegal voting. Unless she has more details to back that up, I can't in good countenance continue showing you this. I want to make sure that maybe they do have something to back that up. But that's an explosive charge to make, that the other side is effectively rigging and cheating. If she does bring proof of that, of course, we'll take you back. So far, she has started saying right at the outset, welcoming fraud, welcoming illegal voting. Not so fast.
Okay, so Fox News, they're cutting away from the president's spokeswoman's press conference. All right, so who is this Hans von Spakovsky? So he's a incredibly dicey scholar. Unfortunately, I want to believe what he says. I want to believe that there's massive fraud so that the Joe Biden victory can be overturned. In an interview with The New Yorker in 2012, von Spakovsky cited two scholars who he said could substantiate that voter impersonation fraud was a significant threat: Robert Pastor of American University and Larry Sabato of the University of Virginia. Von Spakovsky said that Pastor had personally experienced voter impersonation, but Pastor refuted the claim, saying, "I think they just mistakenly checked my name when my son voted. It was just a mistake. Don't think that voter impersonation fraud is a serious problem." Both Pastor and Sabato said they would only support voter ID laws if voter IDs were made free and easily available to all. Larry Sabato, the author of Dirty Little Secrets, has described voter impersonation as relatively rare today. Right. So think about incentives if you want to do some voter impersonation. On the downside is a conviction, a felony, and 5 to 7 years in prison. On the upside, you get to change one vote, right? So voting is almost an irrational act. Like, how often does one vote make a difference? So common sense suggests that voter impersonation is incredibly rare. If you're going to fix an election, you're not going to do it by inducing people to risk committing a felony. In a 2011 article published by the Heritage Foundation, von Spakovsky again referred to Larry Sabato as an authority to establish the existence of common voter fraud, along with Stealing Elections, a book by John Fund, whose claims of voter fraud have been extensively debunked. I started reading Stealing Elections by John Fund, and it was so bad that I just gave up fairly quickly. It was just, he just kept making all these claims that I'd seen debunked. Von Spakovsky describes the efforts of Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach to expose the alleged existence of extensive voter fraud as carefully described research, though Kobach's claims have been shown to be vastly overstated and far from carefully researching. In a court decision, Fish versus Kobach, United States District Court Judge Julie A. Robinson ruled that von Spakovsky's claims of widespread voter fraud were not, in fact, found to be backed up with provable researched cases. Judge Robinson wrote that she gave his testimony little weight because it was premised on several misleading and unsupported examples of non-citizen voter registration, mostly outside the state of Kansas. She noted that during the proceedings, Mr. von Spakovsky could not identify any expert on the subject of non-citizen voter registration. When he tried to use a list of 30 people provided by a Kansas election official as proof of voter fraud in one county, Judge Robinson wrote in her decision, he later admitted during cross-examination he had no personal knowledge as to whether or not any of the individuals had falsely asserted U.S. citizenship when they became registered to vote, and he did not examine the facts of these individual cases. Judge Robinson found witnesses for the defense were often found to be not credible, meaning Chris Kobach's side, finding defendant expert Hans von Spakovsky is a senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, think tank whose mission is to formulate and promote conservative public policies. Von Spakovsky cited a U.S. GAO study for the proposition that the GAO found up to 3% of the 30,000 individuals called for jury duty from voter registration rolls were not U.S. citizens. However, on cross-examination, he admitted that the GAO study contained information on a total of 8 district courts. Half reported that not one non-citizen had been called for jury duty. The 3 remaining district courts reported that less than 1% of those called for jury duty from voter rolls were non-citizens. Therefore, his report was misleading. The judge concluded while von Spakovsky's lack of academic background is not fatal to his credibility, his clear agenda and misleading statements render his opinions unpersuasive. So if this guy's on the A-team, this guy was on Rush Limbaugh today, this guy's going on Mark Levin's show, and he just doesn't have any credibility. According to Professor Richard Hazen, an election law expert at the University of California at Irvine, there are a number of people who have been active in promoting false and exaggerated claims of voter fraud, using that as a pretext to argue for stricter voting and registration rules, and von Spakovsky is at the top of the list. Hazen said Spakovsky's appointment to Donald Trump's Commission on Election Integrity was a big middle finger from Trump to people serious about fixing problems with our elections. So if this is the guy who's going around making the case for voter fraud, Trump supporters are in big trouble.
You're not required to have a postmark or a signature that matches another signature. In fact, you could have voted after Election Day, couldn't you?
You sure could, and it would be very easy if you can pick up absentee ballots that have not been voted by voters, which happens all the time, to submit fraudulent ballots.
Yeah, because no signature is required. So what are they going to check it against? Now, under those circumstances, it's interesting. In-person voting has an absolute deadline.
Okay, it happens all the time, but he can't substantiate these tremendous claims. The guy just does not have credibility. Now, in the chat, there was a comment that how can you have any integrity with mail-in ballots? Well, 5 states have been doing their voting by mail-in for years and years and years, and we don't yet have much evidence of widespread voter fraud in those states. So mail-in balloting is not something that's brand new.
Deadline. You better be at your precinct in Pennsylvania by 8 p.m. Eastern time in the line, or you don't get the vote. So all of these were Trump voters. On the other hand, if you're sitting at home, maybe you're watching the election results, you don't like what's happening in Pennsylvania, the early vote, you can vote your mail-in vote. You don't have to have a postal date on there. In fact, you don't want one. You don't have to sign it. You drop it off, and the vote counts. Correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that is very problematic. Look, there's no reason to extend the deadline for absentee ballots past Election Day. It's not as if absentee ballots, you can only get them a couple of days before Election Day. In fact, the vast majority of them can be requested and obtained weeks, if not more than a month, 2 months before Election Day. So you have plenty of time to get it back.
Okay, so that seems like a stronger argument.
That brings together all of the worst of the American right wing. It puts together conspiracy theories, the inability to accept the defeat, the inability to think critically, the inability to simply push out these tired Republican sycophants that continue to plague them, and the cherry on top of any good right-wing conspiracy, anti-Semitism. This video clip has it all. Newt Gingrich, former Republican congressman and Speaker of the House, and all-around terrible person, went on Fox News and said that Joe Biden's corrupt election theft, was financed by people like George Soros. Of course you have to do it. For any good right-wing conspiracy theory, the money has to have come from the Jews. It's almost a prerequisite. Here's Newt Gingrich.
Your thoughts on that message, Newt?
Well, look, it's a nice sentiment. First, you go out and the Democrats steal 5 or 6 states, and that's what Republicans believe we're watching. We think we have evidence of a lot of it. Then you turn around and you say, let's forget 4 years of Nancy Pelosi. Let's forget 4 years of impeachment, harassment, opposition, hostility, hatred. And now that I've won, why don't we get nice together? I think he would have to do a lot to convince Republicans that this is anything except a left-wing power grab financed by people like George Soros, deeply laid in at the local level. And frankly, I think that it is a corrupt, stolen election. It's very hard for me to understand how we're going to work together without some very, very big steps.
Now, Newt is right about one thing. We're not going to work together. Definitely not with him. But how is it that it's always one or more rich Jews financing the whole operation? Now, it's true. Jewish Americans are one of the most consistently liberal voting groups. They overwhelmingly voted for Hillary Clinton. By even more overwhelming numbers based on early exit polls, Jewish Americans voted for Joe Biden. But that doesn't mean George Soros and, quote, people like him are financing imaginary voter fraud. But they always go to some group of Jews to tie the theory together. Now, Newt claims there's voter fraud evidence. There isn't. He claims states were stolen. They weren't. He claims Biden stole the presidency. He didn't. But then in pops that what weaves it all together is a Jewish man put up the money to do this. And I actually fear that mentioning that makes the whole thing more credible. Biden stole some of these right-wing nuts. I worry that he's putting it in there because it probably helps. It's actually irresponsible to continue putting Newt Gingrich on the air. And Fox News is going to have to figure out what is their play going to be for the next few months. But the message for us as we see this, and I'm going to have videos later today of Mitt Romney and John Kasich, which will stun you, or maybe they won't. What we have to understand.
Okay, so this argument that you can't criticize a Jew because he's a Jew is absurd. It's just like calling Donald Trump a racist because he criticizes black people. If he criticizes an individual who happens to be black, therefore Trump is racist. But if he doesn't criticize people because they are black, then he's racist too. So Apparently, according to David Pakman here, you're not allowed to criticize George Soros because he's Jewish. You're not allowed to criticize Jews. Because if you criticize someone who's Jewish, then you're committing anti-Semitism.
These are awful people and they're not going away. Democrats can't go soft. The left can't go soft thinking, well, now that Trump was such a disaster and Biden won, we'll be able to work productively with Republicans. No. The election was funded by people who donated to Joe Biden. I think it was like $37 each. And it is mostly people on the left. The rare anti-Trump Republicans or anti-Trump Republican groups, these are not our friends. Gingrich is not our friend. He was not anti-Trump, by the way. And we are going to talk about that because there's a certain naivete about bipartisanship that's spreading. And guys, it's not going anywhere. But as far as George Soros goes, I think he's 90 years old. The idea that George Soros is financing the theft of individual ballots like a ground game of stealing a few thousand ballots.
Okay, so we do know that George Soros has extensively donated and is incredibly influential. So to criticize that has absolutely nothing to do with George Soros. What, do you think that people would not criticize George Soros if he was an Episcopalian? That strains credulity. Okay, let's get more from Hans von Spakovsky.
Well, thanks for having me.
Whoops. Wait. That video was supposed to be longer. Here we go.
Back in the hands of election officials by the end of Election Day.
You know, I brought this up to Judge Starr. I brought it up on my radio show. I've written about this now. The Democrats want to, they want an earlier and earlier vote, right, and a later and later count. An earlier vote and a later count. Why?
Well, the earlier you vote, frankly, the less information you have about candidates. I mean, look, some states were starting early voting before the first presidential debate even occurred. And what that meant was that if individuals changed their mind because of information they got after they'd already voted, guess what? It's too late. It's too late to change your ballot. And by counting ballots late, it gives, unfortunately, the opportunity, particularly for absentee ballots, to try to gather up ballots that had not been voted after Election Day, which is another reason they wanted vote harvesting everywhere. So vote harvesters can go through neighborhoods, collect absentee ballots that haven't been voted, and then use that to try to change the results of the election, which they already know how it's going from the preliminary count.
Isn't another reason to have votes earlier and earlier to really incentivize people not to vote in person, where we have more and more structures in place? We have election judges, we have both parties. Your name is matched against a registration. In many states, you have voter ID. You vote early, you vote mail-in. You don't need a signature. You don't need a postal date. Whatever a state does, whatever the boards of elections do in violation of the federal constitution when the state legislature is trying to set in safeguards.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dennis Prager. By the way, this morning I was on Megyn Kelly's podcast, and I was honored to know that she was a big fan of what we're doing here. PragerU, the show, the books. She's a very bright woman. You know, the old, was there a series of blonde jokes? Remember that? Like blondes were stupid? I don't know where that came from. Usually, for a joke to be funny, it.
Okay, so the last man says, Luke, how come Trump crushed it in Florida after Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis cleaned up corrupt officials in Palm Beach and Broward County? So that presumes that Trump's big win in Florida was due to the cleaning up of corruption. Now, it's entirely possible. I have an open mind whether, voter fraud was an incredibly significant part of the 2020 election. I hope that's true. Just need to point out that many of the people who are making that case completely lack credibility, such as Chris Kobach, Hans von Spakovsky, and John Fund.
Has to comport somewhat with reality. I've never seen any correlation in that regard. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that out. Here's another thing I'm going to throw out. I find it difficult to watch Chris Wallace. And that's the reason is not that I differ with him, is that I don't quite understand why he's on Fox News. To say that Ted Cruz is like the Japanese who stayed on islands not knowing that World War II had ended was a stupid and low blow. I think Chris Wallace thinks a little too highly of himself. And I think he has the moral poison of wanting to be liked by the New York Times. That's what I believe. Hey, I'm at Fox, but I'm really above Fox. I'm not like the others. Anyway, their call of Arizona before any other network had called it was irresponsible and I believe destructive. It was a momentum killer and psychological hit. So there are some terrific people, obviously, on Fox News, but I think they're...
it's not the job of Fox News to give psychological support to the Donald Trump campaign. It's not the job of Fox News to provide momentum support. The Fox News decision desk has not had to change a call in 20 years. So they may well prove to be wrong about Arizona. I don't know. But they have a damn good track record of being correct with their predictions. 20 years since the November 2000 elections. Ever since then, they have not had to retract a call. So to me, that's a lot of credibility.
They're slowly committing suicide. People don't want CNN light. I don't want them to distort the news.
I want to live in Luke's safe bubble where voter fraud does not exist. So this is great. People can't handle any kind of measured response. I've never once said voter fraud does not exist. Ever. But people can't handle the things you actually say. They have to distort them to try to make you look stupid and to build up their own fragile sense of self. I'm sure there is voter fraud. My open question is, was it significant enough to swing the 2020 election? Second, the Republicans have been crying about voter fraud for decades, and they have failed to make the case for it. They've failed to prove their case for it until now. Maybe they'll do it with these elections, but they were crying and crying about voter fraud for decades, and they didn't do anything about it, and they didn't document their case. They didn't substantiate their case. They didn't make a case to stand up in a court of law. They didn't make a case to stand up to any kind of critical examination. All they did was cry about it. So you may think, Chad, that it's wonderful for the Trump campaign to have spokespeople who have continually and repeatedly shown to be idiots. You may think it's wonderful to have a convicted sex offender making the case for voter fraud, to be Rudy Giuliani's first speaker at a press conference on Saturday. You may think that's powerful. You may think it's powerful to have people like this von Spakovsky, who is repeatedly thrown to be a buffoon and a fraud and completely irresponsible. You may think that this is wonderful to have him on the Rush Limbaugh show, to have buffoons like this making the case that the 2020 election was stolen. Right? You may think it's great to have people like Chris Kobach, who's been repeatedly humiliated in court because the court finds that he can't substantiate his wild charges about voter fraud. Right? When you have people who continually lose their credibility because they are so sloppy and they are so shoddy and they can't make their case, and yet they grift and make livings from making all these accusations that they can't substantiate. To you, that may be powerful. Like me, I'm not thrilled having convicted sex offenders convicted of exposing themselves to little girls, leading off Rudy Giuliani's press conference to make the case that the 2020 election was stolen from Trump. I'm not thrilled that Hans von Spakovsky and people like Chris Kobach and John Fund are leading the Republican charge to say that the 2020 elections were stolen. Because if the 2020 elections were stolen, and if they were fraudulent, nobody who has any knowledge or understanding are going to take seriously these buffoons like Hans von Spakovsky or John Fund or Chris Kobach. I would like to see someone with credibility make this case. I would like to see a serious case that this 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. But when you have buffoons and child molesters who are leading the way for the Republican Party, then that does not thrill me. But I hand it to you. You want men convicted of exposing themselves to little girls leading the way, making the case that Donald Trump had the 2020 election stolen from him, then I tip my yarmulke to you. That's not how I would want to roll. That's not the type of people that I would want making the case for my side. But that's just me. I've got that weird kind of sensitivity or undue morality, not wanting men convicted of exposing themselves to little girls leading off my press conferences to make the case that the election was stolen from Donald Trump.
There's one iota, not one iota. But I don't want them to have spokesmen like Chris Wallace. That's all. That's it. And I have a feeling that I am not alone in this regard. So there just is a room for others to fill the void that I think there are 4 shows that are worth watching. For Tucker Carlson obviously comes to mind. He has a brilliant monologue every night. Kudos to him. And Laura Ingraham and Sean Hannity produce fine shows with an obvious conservative bent. And I salute them for their work. I think The Five is fun to watch.
And Elliot Blatt says, Luke, you have to go to war with the army you have, not the army you want. Yeah. Can't we do better? I mean, can't we do better? Really, can't we do better than having convicted sex offenders and convicted essentially liars and pathetic grifters like Hans von Spakovsky and Chris Kobach? I mean, can't we do better? Surely there are more serious, more thoughtful, like that People's Pundit guy, Rich Barris. He strikes me as credible. Robert Barnes, he strikes me as credible. But John Fund, please.
There are some terrific folks on that panel. Greg Gutfeld is him. He's great. No, he is great. That's correct. And not only he, but he's unique. He's a very talented and a very sharp, quick wit. And by the way, he has made a video for us. Greg Gutfeld made 2 videos for PragerU, just for the record. There is a headline in American Greatness, one of the most important websites. No one knows who won the election. There is room for great doubt about the integrity of this election. It's exactly correct. It doesn't mean a thing to the Democrats. That it means nothing. In fact, they only have contempt. Half this country is not convinced that Joe Biden won. I'm not saying he didn't. I just want to make that clear. I am not saying Joe Biden did not win the presidency. I am saying that I don't know that he did. I've never said this about any candidate of either party in my life. This is more unprecedented, uncharted territory because of the left. They cheat, they lie with the ease with which you breathe. I make that.
And Dennis Prager just doesn't know what he's talking about, but he's telling an audience what it wants to hear. This is a great example of a story where people just want to hear their point of view. They don't want to know the truth. They don't want to know what academic experts have to say. They don't want to know the facts. A lot of people just want to be told, that their side is righteous and that their side was screwed over. Dennis Prager has not read any academic studies of voter fraud. Right. So back in 2002, we had people like Rush Limbaugh, Michelle Malkin, and John Fund, then the Wall Street Journal, talking about skullduggery on the Democrat side, a massive voter fraud scandal unfolding in South Dakota. The Republican state attorney general he investigated two investigations of voter fraud in South Dakota, found 2 cases where criminal laws may have been violated. 2, right? And so this Hans von Spakovsky guy, he works at the Heritage Foundation. They keep track of documentable cases of voter fraud. In about 20 years, they come up with about 1,600 examples. In 20 years. It's pathetic. For voter fraud to have affected this election, you'd need a lot more examples than that. Just in Georgia, the margin in Georgia is about 10,000 votes, so 5,000 votes going a different way.
That point almost daily. There's no reason to trust anything the left does. Anything.
There's no reason to trust what anybody does. The left is no more fraudulent and dishonest than the right. Right? There's no political orientation that only attracts righteous people. I mean, this is just Dennis Prager telling his audience what they want to hear, and he's either doing it out of grift, which I do not believe. I just believe he's doing this out of laziness and just lack of information. So let's look at an oft-repeated allegation of voter fraud made by John Fund, who's now going to be a guest on Dennis Prager's show. Wall Street Journal columnist. an author who proclaimed in his 2004 book, Stealing Elections, that several of the 9/11 hijackers were registered to vote. He asserted at least 8 of the 19 hijackers who attacked the World Trade Center and the Pentagon were actually able to register to vote in either Virginia or Florida while they made their deadly preparation for 9/11. And so this is how he starts off his book. When he's called on it by the New Yorker in a 2012 podcast, he says, "Oh, I was told this by an official who I need to keep anonymous." So he didn't do any independent investigation of what he's told by apparently Michael Chertoff, then an assistant attorney general in charge of the Justice Department Criminal Division. He just gets told this. Then he uses it as the foundation for his book, Stealing Elections. When he's called on that this assertion was factually false, he says, "Oh, I don't remember. That was a long time ago." But he's been ridiculed over and over and over again for his shoddy journalism. But he doesn't want to revisit it. He doesn't want to try to do some research on it to back up his case. It's just that a lot of these people, like Hans von Spakovsky and Chris Kobach and John Fund, they just throw out these attention-seeking sound bites that are not grounded in reality. And again, I have a completely open mind that there may be massive fraud in this unprecedented 2020 election. And I see there have been a lot of court cases filed by the Trump side, and on the face of it, they look pretty powerful. So I am open to finding out where they go and how extensive voter fraud has been this time around. But up until now, Republicans have consistently failed to provide documentation and proof for their claims about widespread voter fraud. So John Fund's source for this claim is a December 22, 2002 interview he said he conducted with Michael Chertoff, and he provides no other corroborating evidence. So he just gets told this by a Bush administration official, and he treats it as gospel truth. And then he tries to protect the source when anyone who's done any investigation knows the source is Michael Chertoff. So as a regular columnist for national newspapers, John Fund writes stories intended to inflame, though his language is never partisan or inflammatory. So pundits are useless. Pundits are useless. They just sound off. They tell audiences what they want to hear. I'd much rather spend my time with people who are expert in this particular area. The care he takes in his regular columns, and I'm reading from the book, The Myth of Voter Fraud. Kerry takes in his regular columns to appear reasonable as evident in his book, which Fund writes that the hijackers were actually able to register to vote, not that they did register to vote or were registered to vote. What does it mean to say someone is able to register to vote? Everyone is able to register to vote. Like any jerk can go fill out a form to register to vote. It sounds horrible, doesn't mean anything. John Fund echoes previous statements by prominent conservatives that the hijackers and their associates may have been registered to vote. He had Diane Ravitch, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute, who said the same thing. Senator Christopher Bond, Republican from Missouri, said the same thing. But in person and on TV, John Fund was much less careful with his words. Appearing on CNN October 24, 2004, talking to Lou Dodd to promote his book, Stealing Election, he says 8 of the 9/11 hijackers, they did register to vote, which is completely false. The man completely lacks credibility, and yet because he's published 2 books on voter fraud, he is treated by some in the conservative movement and the Republican Party as an expert.
Integrity is not an issue. The issue is winning. And if you have to cheat in an election,
there are just as many Republicans who are willing to cheat as Democrats. There's not one side that's got a monopoly on righteousness. It's not one side that has more integrity than the other.
Who is as civil and open a conservative as exists, wrote a book. If it isn't close, they can't cheat. What do you think it was about, Republicans or Democrats?
Yeah, it's by Hugh Hewitt, who is predictably partisan. He always takes the Republican side. So just because he's got a catchy title doesn't mean that he has any substance behind what he's saying. Did his work, say, affect scholarship in this arena? No. It was regarded as partisan propaganda, and it made no imprint except on rubes who bought it.
Anyone with an open and honest outlook knows that the Democrats cheated
And Elliot says, are academic studies of the past 100% relevant to the present? Maybe, maybe not. That's why I keep saying I am completely open to the case that voter fraud played a substantial role in the 2020 election. What I'm not open to is that these liars, hacks, grifters like von Spakovsky, John Fund, Chris Kobach, and company, that they are going to be credible people to make the case for this. I'm highly suspicious of these losers.
With the Nixon-Kennedy victory. And it is not new.
And the last man says, look into the recount of Cook County after the 1960 election. Nixon was clearly cheated. That's a matter of academic debate. Has that been established? I know that it's continually brought up, and I'm completely open. If that is established fact, then I will cite it as established fact. But it's a lot easier to just allege that Cook County was stolen for John F. Kennedy than to provide substantiation. Like, where's the substantiation, bro?
There is no notion on the left. There is no.
And I know something about election manipulation. I have an acquaintance who may very well have played a key role in shifting 2 United States Senate races. So Michael Goland, real estate developer in Southern California, and he played a key role possibly in shifting 2 United States Senate races. All right, so I completely understand that the votes can be manipulated.
There is among most liberals and there is among most conservatives, but there is no notion on the left that there is a higher law than winning. When you either believe or say, a lot of them just say it and talk themselves into it, that...
Okay, so for people whose jobs it is to win elections, most of them don't believe that there is a higher law than winning an election, except they don't want to be publicly humiliated and prosecuted. So Michael Goland, an acquaintance of mine, and in the 1986 California Senate campaign, he funded a candidate, apparently illegally, to draw votes away from Ed Schau, the Republican candidate, because he wanted Senator Alan Cranston, the Democrat, to win because Alan Cranston was so friendly to Israel and Ed Schau was not friendly to Israel in his estimation. Also, in Chicago, he spent $1 million of his own money, apparently illegally, to defeat Senator Charles Percy, a Republican, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And pro-Israel PACs targeted Charles Percy because he supported President Reagan's decision in 1981 to sell AWACS and sophisticated fighter bombers to Saudi Arabia. So I recognize that an individual, through funding and through funding of, say, some independent candidate, that they can make a difference. Now, this isn't going into the ballot box and changing votes, but this is definitely gaming the system. So whether or not Michael Goland shifted to elections, many people, if you research the matter, will claim that he did, or that there was a good chance that he did. So it's not that I'm naive to the possibility that elections can be swayed by questionable behavior.
Republican Party is the party of racism. Well, then, wouldn't you stuff ballot boxes if you were opposed to the Ku Klux Klan taking over?
Yeah, okay, that's motivation. But there's this, does this come out of movies or TV, that if you have motivation and opportunity, that somehow that this makes a convincing case? This is not how prosecutors work.
Now, think about it for a moment. Let's say they believe their lies about the right, that we're all racist. Let's say they believe that. Why wouldn't you stuff a ballot box to prevent racist white supremacists from gaining power?
Because you'd go to prison for a long time if you were caught. That's why. And because there are safeguards. Now, these safeguards may be insufficient this occasion in 2020. Maybe there are documental evidences of substantial voter fraud in the past, but it hasn't been shown yet by the Republicans. Hasn't been documented yet by scholars. these wild accusations that say Cook County was manipulated to favor John F. Kennedy in 1960. It's effortless to say that. It takes a lot of effort to document that. It hasn't been documented. It's just something that gets tossed about, right? Just saying that people have a motivation for cheating is not a strong argument for substantiating that charge.
It's like stopping. Yes, all right. Stopping. If Trump is a dictator, Trump is a fascist, then why?
Luke Ford seems to think liberal scholars tell the truth. I tend to think that scholarship, when it stands up to widespread criticism, that it has something to teach us. And I think scholarship almost always has more to teach us than the empty words of pundits who can just throw around wild charges with zero need to substantiate them, as Dennis Prager is doing right here.
Not stuff a ballot box. Would you have resented a German who stuffed a ballot box to prevent Hitler from gaining?
Do I believe that O.J. Simpson killed Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman? Absolutely.
Power in 33? Would you have stuffed a ballot box? Well, there were never elections, even to get the communists in power. So it's a little, but against any tyrant. Would you stuff a ballot box against, would you have against Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe? You'd have been a good person, right?
Yeah, well, what if the penalty was that you would get sliced open, right? Maybe you'd be a little more cautious about stuffing ballot boxes for against Robert Mugabe.
The opening, I read the New York Times editorial. What was the opening line? Oh, yes, we stopped an authoritarian, was it racist? Nationalist, yeah, an authoritarian nationalist. Now, why isn't it a mitzvah, to use a famous Jewish word? Good deed, commandment, that means both. To stuff a ballot box to stop a dictator. You can't.
Look, saying that the Democrats have motivation for cheating, to me, is not terribly persuasive. It's mildly persuasive, right? I mildly, it's a very mild case. What's much more difficult to do is to document these charges and provide substantial evidence showing that this played out in real life. Now, People's Pundit, Rich Barris, and Robert Barnes, they've made a lot of tweets and posts and public commentary that they think that this 2020 election was stolen. I do take those two guys seriously, and I look forward to seeing more substantiation of their charges.
If you take the left seriously, you have to believe that they cheated. Stuffing about.
No, you don't have to believe that they cheated just because they thought they were going up against someone who was evil. All right. Just because you can see motivation and opportunity, that does not go together to provide substantiation, right? It opens a question. It leads you in a direction for investigation, but it's so much easier to make these wild charges compared to substantiating them.
Ballot box to get a Republican out of the presidency, any Republican, and especially Donald Trump, is an act of great good. Why wouldn't they? I mean, they can't have their rhetoric and then go, oh, Democrats would never do such a thing. If you believe that you are...
Okay, it's absurd to say that Democrats or Republicans would never try to manipulate the game or manipulate ballots, right? That's absurd. Everybody wants to win.
Are getting rid of a dictator, a fascist, an evil human being. Why is it wrong to cheat in the election? I'd like somebody to answer that. I want to know why.
Pragmatically, because the results for you and for your side may be catastrophic. It's not like we can just act and then that's it. For every action, there's a reaction. Like you could impose a 90% income tax, right? And you might think, oh, with a 90% income tax, we are going to quadruple the amount of tax that the government takes in. But people change their behavior in reaction to incentives. So why would it be wrong for a Democrat to, say, participate in illegal behavior to steal this election? Well, it'd be wrong for them pragmatically because they could go to jail and get humiliated. It may be wrong for them tactically and strategically because that provokes a backlash. It's not like you can just do one thing and then there's no reaction. That's it. No, there's always reaction. To every action, there's reaction.
Is it wrong for a leftist to cheat to get Joe Biden elected. 1A.
And the chat says Victor Davis Hanson knows about California voting fraud. Does he really? And has he published about this in, say, peer-reviewed publications? Does he know how to make a substantial case here? I would not be surprised if there is substantial voting fraud in California. Just to my knowledge, that case has not yet been made.
Prager 776. I'd like you to ask that. Again, this is another one of these important questions to pose to a relative or friend. Do you believe that Donald Trump was a fascist dictator? If so, on what grounds is it moral not to cheat to get Joe Biden?
Have I heard of the 1988 Mexican election? Yes, I have. And from what I know, the 1988 Mexican election was stolen. They just burned down several cities. That's a major felony, bro. All right, it's a major felony on the books. Life isn't just what happens on the books. The speed limit when you're driving down the freeway may well say 55 or 65 miles an hour. But that doesn't mean that anything will happen to you if you drive 70 miles an hour. If all the traffic around you is driving over 75 miles an hour and you're driving 70 in a 55 zone, you're not going to get pulled over for a ticket. On the books, it's a felony to riot and loot. But in real life, if you have particular district attorneys in power, if they're George Soros-funded district attorneys, you are not risking a felony conviction if you go along with the mob in certain locales. So, Luke Ford, what caused you to be suddenly so skeptical of claims of voter fraud? Absolutely, I'll admit, I've made a 180 degree on this, and it's because I read 2 books and listened to a bunch of podcasts over the weekend. I read the book, The Myth of Voter Fraud, and I read the book, Election Meltdown. I only read parts of The Myth of Voter Fraud, and listened to podcasts and interviews with the authors, and I did some research on the people on the right who I had, until this weekend, always considered the leading authorities on voter fraud. Until this weekend, I considered John Fund, Chris Kobach, Hans von Spakovsky to be leading experts for the Republican Party on voter fraud. Then I just did a little research into their history, and it's horrible. I'm not anti-fraud. I just realized that these guys who have been leading the way for the Republican Party for decades, complaining about voter fraud, that they're shysters and cheaters and grifters and dishonorable and shoddy. Now, absolutely open to substantiation of voter fraud, but when the people who are making the case for it turn out to be so shoddy, as I just realized this weekend, then I'm taking a second look. So this election 2020 may well be unprecedented, but I'm just realizing all of a sudden this weekend that after decades of listening to Republicans cry about voter fraud, and I took it seriously, I thought that they had made a really good case. And now I find out that they were incompetent, that they were shoddy, that they were dishonest, that they were just grifting, that they were just throwing out wild accusations, and that they had no shame, that when they get called on their lies, that they just try to squirm out of it. Right? Then it's like, whoa, these guys who I thought were the leading authorities on voter fraud from a Republican perspective turn out to be shysters, competent, greedy grifters. Then okay, let's look at this again. So I did some research this weekend, and I'd heard for decades about all this voter fraud. And I did some research this weekend, and I found that all these claims, what I assume were massive amounts of voter fraud, such as in, Cook County in Illinois in 1960 for John F. Kennedy, and all the other major claims that I have heard for decades about voter fraud against Republicans, that it has not been substantiated. It may well be true, but Republicans haven't provided the evidence. Their leading spokespeople just make these wild accusations. They just throw these rhetorical bombs, but they haven't provided the evidence. So all these people that I'd looked to as authoritative in this area, I found out that they've been lying, that they've been incompetent. So I look forward to someone doing this job in a competent way. right? I'm sure there are people who are competent. I'm sure there are, great brains and scholars and great legal minds who can build a case. But the people we've had building this case have been absolutely pathetic. Luke Ford no longer believes in taking his own side. I take my own side. I believe that Donald Trump would be a better president than Joe Biden. But if the people who are making the case for voter fraud are incompetent, it does not serve my side to praise them, to prop them up. I want sharp, responsible adults making my case. I don't want grifters and losers. Why in such a hurry? I never read a book on voter fraud until this weekend. I'd heard about voter fraud, but I never researched it. I didn't read academic papers about it until the last 3 days. And when I delved into academic papers and perspectives on voter fraud, the people that I had looked to as authoritative on voter fraud turned out to be incompetent. So I'm reacting to that. And I'd like to see competent people making the case for voter fraud and providing substantial evidence.
Elected. Can't have it both ways. Can't say we would never cheat.
And the book Election Meltdown was published in 2020, and the myth of voter fraud was published around 2012. So you can read 37 pages in the preview on Google Books, The Myth of Voter Fraud. John Fund provides no evidence from Virginia or Florida election officials confirming the registration status of any of the hijackers. John Fund's allegation about the 9/11 hijackers was widely circulated. He has had a surprisingly long life. This allegation has a long life, given that it is poorly documented and very likely false. Like, all sorts of politicians have repeated this allegation that 9 of the 19 9/11 hijackers were registered to vote. John Fund was a guest on Glenn Beck's syndicated CNN show in November 2006. And again, he repeats the charge that 8 of the 19 9/11 hijackers were registered to vote. So this is after it's been knocked down again and again and again. And this guy just keeps coming out with this shoddy story. And he's had a long life, peddling his columns. He's had a long life in conservative journalism. He's been nationally syndicated. He's on TV a lot. He's on radio a lot. He has a wide audience, and he appears to speak with great authority when he says that our voting system is so porous that 8 young men from the Middle East who allegedly hate us for our open democratic system and our freedoms were actually registered to vote right here in the United States.
We would allow a fascist dictator to win. Oh, you would? That's not exactly a big boast. We'll take your calls. Not we, I will.
The Dennis Prager Show.
Yeah, I have a lot of suspicion about this 2020 election. I see a lot of disturbing stuff on Twitter and that I'm reading in articles. And so I would not be surprised if for the first time we finally get substantiation of a great deal of voter fraud in this election.
By the way, I do want to mention other names at Fox News. Jesse Waters is just terrific, and he's on the 5. So he and Greg are gifts. And Pete Hegseth, Brian Kilmeade, Judge Janine, Mark Levin. There are a lot of terrific folks. The Fox Morning Show, which I've been on many times. I just want to make that clear. It's not just 2-3 people.
And what makes them terrific folks is that they pump out the same kind of conservative propaganda that Prager is pumping out here.
But there is a lot of daytime stuff, and Chris Wallace, that does make you wonder if the station is changing. Been on many of these people's shows. Appreciate them a lot.
I am not an expert on voter fraud. I haven't extensively researched voter fraud in the 2020 election or at any time. The extent of my learning about voter fraud is reading a couple of books, right? Meaning one full book, Election Meltdown, large parts of the book, The Myth of Voter Fraud. I started reading John Fund's book on voter fraud, reading some academic papers on voter fraud, listening to podcasts on voter fraud. I'm not an expert. I have not extensively researched this question. It's just from the little bit that I finally learned, I've suddenly become highly suspicious of these Republican Party talking points.
Thought I would add that to what I had said earlier. The thought about if things were reversed is so big. If Donald Trump had won and all this cheating had been alleged, credible things, like the highest votes in history, percentage-wise, in so many places like Milwaukee. The president goes up in every area, goes up among black voters, Hispanic voters, does better than last time, and loses. Much better than last time.
Okay, there's nothing stunning about that. There are arguments to be made about this election is weird and anomalous and that there's nefarious things going on. But the president increases his vote percentage among blacks and Latinos does not automatically make it just so compelling that he's going to win. He also dropped 5 points in white male voters.
7 million new votes for the president? Yeah. That's amazing. It's completely amazing. Barack Obama went down by 4 million votes, I believe, in his second. How do you go up 7 million in your next time? Well, you say, well, because the other guy got more votes. Okay, that's right. That would be the answer. I acknowledge. Okay, everybody. Jim in Rochester, Minnesota. Dennis Prager, hi.
And Senile Corrupt Boomer says, Luke Ford, Zero Hedge has a logistical regression curve that shows they stole swing states. Look, this sounds impressive. And I'm no expert here. But logistical regression curves don't prove the Democrats stole states. Right? That's just the beginning. That's just the opening. That just indicates, hey, something's anomalous here. We need to do further research. But compiling a logistical regression curve does not prove voter fraud. It opens the question to say, this is weird. We need further research here. There is a quantitative case you need to incorporate. Yeah, there is a quantitative case that there are anomalies. There may well be widespread fraud. I've looked at that, and guess what? I'm just not expert enough. The curve does not confirm, to the best of my knowledge, that there's widespread voter fraud. The curve confirms that it's weird. Logistical regression curve. It sounds incredibly powerful. I'm not sure that logistical regression curves in swing states prove cheating. They open the question, is there cheating? But then we need to do much, much more.
Hi, Dennis, Rochester, Michigan. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, you're in Michigan?
Yes, in Rochester, Michigan.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, all right.
Okay, we all make mistakes.
Correct. Go ahead.
Yes, I've listened to you for a very, very long time. I've got PredictIt, both the Rational Bibles. I agree with you probably more than anybody I know. But there's one thing that I wanted to talk about, like this morning, I think last week also, you opened your show with, we've lost a man who loves this country. Now you've talked about how it's not over. It's just so that you realize there's so many people that are looking for answers and hanging on every word you say. And we're not looking for, we're looking for truth. You always talk about truth.
And guess what? For years of my life, I did hang on every word that Dennis Prager said. And if I had to choose someone to hang on every word that a radio host said, he was a pretty good choice. Right? I was at a very low state in my life. I had chronic fatigue syndrome. I was basically bedridden for 6 years. And I needed some kind of heroic figure to look up to. Now, was this silly? Yes. Was it absurd? Yes. Does Dennis Prager deserve to be somebody that people hang on his every word? No. But we danced with the one who brung us. Like, Dennis helped get me through a very dark period of my life, and he was very kind to me. And so many of us need heroes. Many of us need people that we put up on a pedestal, particularly narcissistically inclined people like me. We have a great need for heroes because we think it elevates our own status if we can claim any connection to the person that we put up on a pedestal. But Dennis Prager has no expertise in voter fraud, just as I have no expertise in voter fraud. I wonder, however, if I've read a little bit more on the topic and done a little bit more study on the topic than he has.
We're looking for it because we all know we haven't lost squat yet. This is not over. And it's important. I mean, when they talk in the Bible about Moses hold up the staff so people can see it, that's what people are looking for. Again, not
No, bless your soul. I agree with you. I'm aware of that.
Look, if you look up to someone, it should be someone with expertise, right? If you're looking up to someone, it should be someone who knows what they're talking about. Dennis Prager puts on a great talk show for a certain type of person. Luke Ford, you idolize the talk show host that you have, not the talk show host that you should have. Right. So if people need an idol, then Dennis Prager is a good one, because he's a relatively moderate guy and he has some interesting things to say and probably less destructive than many other talk show hosts. But talk show hosts, by and large, don't help you better understand the world. They entertain you, but it's entertainment. They manipulate you by telling you what you want to hear. That's how you get an audience. You tell the audience what it wants to hear. They're servicing you like a hooker services a John. If you want to actually learn something, then talk to people who've devoted their entire adult lives to studying a particular topic.
I'm blessed with the ability to react quickly to things that are said to me, like in a debate or on the show. But my general belief is to take my time. That's why I don't tweet much. I don't tweet on something that happens at that moment because I want to think things through. So I've needed time to think. And I have come to the conclusion that there is little reason to believe the results. They might be accurate, but now I do believe that there has been more fraud than honesty in the alleged election of Joe Biden. I wasn't prepared to say that immediately because I didn't know.
And Gilbert says on Twitter, Luke, I'm disappointed that you buy into the fraudulent election theory in general. I don't buy into it. I'm open to it. I see anomalies that demand investigation.
There is so much more evidence today than there was. Listen, election day was just last Tuesday. I wasn't prepared to say on Wednesday or Thursday, oh, there's so much fraud. I didn't know. Now I know. Or
now he knows? Really?
Believe that there is so much fraud.
Yes, now you believe.
So thank you. That was.
Belief is not really what's most important when evaluating claims of election fraud.
It's important. Georgia in Brooklyn, New York. Dennis Prager, hi.
Hi, Dennis. Dennis, I have so much in common with you. I can't wait to meet you someday.
I hope so.
Yes, I want to tell you, if I'm at Disney World, I wouldn't run to see Dumbo either, and I really like Buzz Lightyear a lot. And
wow.
You said that recently.
Wait a minute. You would run sooner to meet me than Buzz Lightyear? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that too.
Wait, no. So, yes. No. I'm not looking for a compliment. I just wanted to know what the reference was.
And a question in the chat, how much of Dennis Prager's reaction is driven by emotion? I think the reactions of most people, including Dennis Prager, are driven by emotion. Men pretend that they're above being driven by emotion, generally speaking. Usually they are deluding themselves. Women are usually much more open to admitting they're driven by emotion. Pretty much most people, most of the time, are driven by emotions.
No, you had said if you went to Disney World, you wouldn't run to see Dumbo, but you really do like Buzz Lightyear.
Oh, I see. Okay, fine. Thank you. I get it now. Right.
And this is what I want to say about your question. To do a mitzvah, thinking you're facilitating, a good agenda, even if it's dishonest. I believe that's like romanticizing and sentimentalizing crime. Like Robin Hood, he stole from the rich to give to the poor. It might sound noble, but it's stealing. And to me, that's going ahead of God. And I think it's wrong.
Well, but you can imagine, and I certainly can, circumstances in which cheating and lying would be moral. If a German, hit a Jew during World War II, he was cheating and he was lying. If the Gestapo came and said, "Are you hiding a Jew?" He said, "Of course not." He was lying, and it was a good thing and a moral thing that he did.
Now, when someone says Democrats stole the election, there are many layers of meaning to that. That doesn't mean that people are deliberately going in there and falsifying ballots. You could say that, constant media manipulation and other forms of manipulation shifted the election.
The kind of lying that's not bearing a false witness. That's really expedient. That's not the kind of lying that God forbids. But
all right, so we're that's fine. So thank you for calling, but that's my whole point. That isn't the kind of lying that God forbids. So the leftist has talked himself and herself into...
And Glib says, I appreciate Luke's dispassionate, non-committal tone and content, but I'd like to have a bourbon right now, though. I've never had a bourbon, so I don't know the effect, Glib, that you're seeking. But guess what? We only understand a tiny little bit of reality. I cannot conceive any way that Joe Biden overall will be a better president than Donald Trump. I can't conceive it. That doesn't mean it's not true. So I don't think we should despair, because despair means that we have a completely misunderstanding of our own capacity to see reality. All of us only gets a tiny sliver of reality. Each of us just gets, a tiny little bit. So we can't despair, because to despair is to assume that we have godlike powers and that we know the trajectory of the country. And we should not do that, because we simply don't know enough. So it may well turn out to be that Donald Trump would have made catastrophic errors in his second term, and that compared to a second-term Trump, Joe Biden would be an improvement, or Joe Biden may be worse. I cannot see any way that Joe Biden will be better than a second-term Trump. But the negative change from Biden may well be survivable. So I know a lot of people on the right saying that this is the last election that the Republicans could win for president. I don't believe that. I don't believe that the United States of America is at risk of dissolution or being conquered by internal or external enemies. I don't believe that life as we know it is over because of this election. I do not believe that we should despair. Despair is arrogant. Despair is asserting that you understand, that you have godlike powers to see the trajectory of the country and to see the trajectory of politics and to know the implications of all these millions of variables that are operating right now.
Believing Donald Trump is a fascist. Therefore, they can sleep well at night if they cheat in elections. That's the exact point that I'm making.
Okay, and then Elliot says, Luke, what about the calls to punish Trump supporters? Think about all the grifters on the right who are going, oh, there are going to be these lists. I mean, this was going around, over the weekend, that there's this Dominion software that was stealing votes from Trump and directing them to Biden. Turned out to be one example of human error. And then there's this widespread Twitter fear going around over the weekend and even in previous weeks that Trump supporters will get hunted down like dogs, and they'll be putting into camps. They won't be able to get jobs. It's hysteria. It's hysteria. People get audiences. People build followings by feeding people's hysteria. It's incredibly unhelpful, unhealthy, and untrue. Trump supporters are not going to be hunted down like dogs. Now, could there be an individual Trump supporter here and an individual Trump supporter there who suffers negative consequences? Yes. But overall, Trump supporters are not going to be hunted down like dogs. They're not going to be put into camps. There's not going to be this massive firing of Trump supporters. Right? It's hysteria. And the most prominent people on both the right and the left, they become prominent by feeding people's need for hysteria, to feed people's need for drama. Most people don't lead consequential lives. How do they live with themselves not leading a life of consequence? By continually filling themselves up with drama. Drama is what you live on when you don't have a life of substance. There aren't going to be lists of Trump supporters and tens of thousands of them getting punished and fired and isolated. It's not going to happen. It's hysteria. Look at Politico. AOC wants to cancel those who worked for Trump. Good luck with that, they say. Memories are short in this town. Just look at the veterans of George W. Bush's White House who did just fine for themselves. Remember George W. Bush went into stupid, pointless wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and how supporters of George W. Bush, they were going to be punished when Barack Obama took power? Well, it didn't happen. Over the weekend, people started making lists. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez kicked things off on Friday with a tweet that terrified Trump world. Well, it terrified people who prefer to live a life of unnecessary drama rather than consequence. No sane person would be terrified by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's tweet. If this terrified you, it means you need help. It means you need to connect to God, to a higher power, to, if you don't believe in God, then to truth, to reason, to justice. Like, you need to connect to something much more deeply if you're terrified by a tweet by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or if you're frightened by this prospect that Trump supporters are going to get put on a list. It's not going to happen in a substantial way that affects tens of thousands of people, let alone millions of people. She wrote, is anyone archiving these Trump sycophants for when they try to downplay or deny their complicity in the future? I foresee decent probability of many deleted tweets, writings, photos in the future, and a group calling itself the Trump Accountability Project sprung up to heed her call. So has the Trump Accountability Project frightened you? If it has frightened you, you're a little drama queen inside. There's no reason to be frightened of this. There's no reason to be frightened for America. America's going to survive a Joe Biden presidency. Remember what they did. The Trump Accountability Project's sparse website declares, we should not allow the following groups of people to profit from their experience. Those who elected him, those who staffed his government, those who funded him. Rarely a healthy sign in any democracy, the enemies list started to freak out some normally unflappable Trump officials in the White House. First, I brushed it off as ridiculous, but what is scary is that she's serious, said a White House official of the tweet. That is terrifying that a sitting member of Congress is calling for something like that. I believe there is a life after this in politics for Trump officials. The idea that a sitting member of Congress wants to purge from society and ostracize us should scare the American people. Definitely should scare the American people more than it scares me. That type of rhetoric is terrifying when you have 70 million Americans who voted for this president. Might start with Trump officials, but what if they go further? There's no need to be terrified. None. There's no rational need. If you feel terrified, it's because you have some inner emotional need for unnecessary drama. Because you have a life that fundamentally does not work. You don't have a life of consequence and seriousness. Therefore, you are looking for silly, girly drama. Before the election, when polls suggested an anti-Trump rout, some current and former Trump officials seemed to be positioning themselves for a new era where they would be forced to shed their association with the president. One top official at the White House became a bit of an inside joke among Washington reporters, sending conspicuous private texts, taking digs at the administration and claiming to crave post-election without Trump. Some Republicans found it curious when a recent Republican National Committee official suddenly tweeted his support of Biden the day before the election. Was he having trouble finding a new job? But the results have changed that conversation. More Republicans on the Hill and Trump officials now insist there may be less of a penalty for service to Trump. Many Trump advisors say they are not worried. They point to the aftermath of similarly controversial administrations as reassurance. They argue that if the Bush-era politicians and staffers who led the country to war in Iraq survived without being purged from politics, media, and corporate America, then Trump's advisors weren't either. The Bush people face this, said one of the president's closest advisors. Bush left office very unpopular. People thought thousands of people died in unnecessary war, and Bush was responsible for it. Bush lied. People died. Everybody forgets that now. George Bush is an artist who doesn't do partisan politics. Look at the wealth accumulated by the two main architects of the Iraq War, Don Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney. They've both done very, very well for themselves since 2008.
We all acknowledge that you have to. I mean, there's something wrong with your moral sensibilities if you don't recognize there are times it is right, just like there is times that it is right to kill. It is times that there is right to steal. It is right to lie. That's one of the evil things that the left has done by portraying the rest of us as racist, fascists. They can.
Okay, let's say hello to Rodney Martin. Rodney.
Well, Luke, I just have to come on and be contrarian to your contrarian view. Just a few points, if I may. How's my sound, by the way?
Sounds great.
All right. So you said essentially people can't really predict how things are going to go. I think that I'm paraphrasing what your statement was. Don't be concerned.
Yes.
Well, would you please go up and down Los Angeles and tell everybody to take the boards off their windows? Because people were pretty sure about how things were going to go if Donald Trump had been projected the winner by the mainstream media, or how it may still happen if Trump pulls this out. Arizona is trending towards Trump in these remaining votes. Biden's down to just 14,000 votes with 75,000 yet to count. And a vast majority of those remaining 75,000 are in red counties, just red meat Donald Trump counties. So to say people can't predict or have a fairly good idea, also Luke, I would say you like large newspapers, you cite them. The Wall Street Journal editorial board this morning says the exact same thing that I just said, that of course, what would have happened, that's why all those boards went up on all these stores' windows, was we pretty much can predict the actions of the left. When they don't get their way, they attack people, they burn, they loot, they murder, they rape, they engage in arson. And they have, for the last 4 years, been, I mean, this list thing, Luke, they've been doing this for the last 4 years. They realize that it is immensely successful in getting rid of so-called neo-Nazis, anybody that they want to paint as a Nazi or a fascist or whatever. And so they create these lists and proceed to dox people and such. You can find them. Now, I'm not saying there's going to be one consolidated list, but like this group, Trump Accountability Project, look for about 3 or 4 of those to do that type of devil's handiwork. So I think that it's a little naive to say that if the left is allowed to establish hegemony in the United States, that there will not be some sort of blowback on people that stood with Donald Trump. Now, that could be a few, as you say, but given their history, and I'm going off their history, that's my, I think past conduct for a person or a group is a pretty good indicator of their future actions. So now I'm not in a situation where they could, harm me per se, and I'm the biggest big mouth around on these subjects, or one of them. But to compare Donald Trump's administration and his staff to George W. Bush's is a little nonsensical. Do you honestly think Stephen Miller is going to have enormous job prospects on the same par as George W. Bush? Keep in mind, George W. Bush represented another type of Republican Party. George W. Bush actually supported illegal immigration. George W. Bush did engage in these foreign wars, which for the most part the Democrats supported. There wasn't a huge divide and vitriol between George W. Bush and the Democrats and the left as there exists between Donald Trump. Donald Trump did things that George W. Bush and that old Rockefeller type Republicans just never touched. Donald Trump attacked immigration. He didn't attack it on the same, as forcefully as I would have, but Donald Trump did. That has created just an absolute frothing at the mouth. He put in force a travel ban on countries that have a propensity to terrorism. Incidentally, the last president to put such a travel ban that focused on Middle Eastern terrorism was a Democrat by the name of Jimmy Carter, who probably, if he ran today like he ran in 1976, could not be a Democrat. So I'd like to just push back on those points, because I think that, as times have changed, the conduct of persons have changed, and we've already seen the blueprints of their conduct. And that is why making sure that these ballots are legit, that there has not been ballot stuffing, ballot harvesting, ballot fraud, and going through this court system and going so far as to let state legislators pick the electors, I think is wholly in order. I think when all is said and done, the Democrats justified in their minds, in their warped minds,
Take him to the bar,
in their low IQ minds, that it was okay to commit this type of theft because they were indeed preventing a quote Nazi and fascist from remaining in power.
So how terrified do you think Trump supporters should feel right now?
Oh, I don't think all Trump supporters should be terrified. Let me just clarify that. First of all, I think for the bottom of the bottom of the barrel, like you and I, that have voiced support for Trump and have been critical of the things like that, we're just not big enough fish to fry. But if I was Stephen Miller, and this does go the way where Biden enters the White House, I don't know, what prospects does Stephen Miller have unless Donald Trump comes back in 2024 and takes the presidency back like Grover Cleveland did back at the turn of the century. 1901, I believe. No, it was 1890, I believe. Grover Cleveland was elected, ran against Benjamin Harrison, lost in much the same manner as we're seeing today. When he was leaving the White House, his wife told everybody, don't change anything, we're going to come back. And sure enough, they came back, Grover Cleveland. And so Grover Cleveland was on each side of the Benjamin Harrison administration. So could that happen? I predict that if Biden is allowed to squat in the Oval Office as a result of voter fraud, or if he just legitimately gets in and say it's proven that he actually won this, he will be as effective as Jimmy Carter. His Democrats lost seats there. They don't have a very strong functional majority. The Republicans are going to hold the Senate, and I think you will have a malaise, and he will crash the economy as he undoes a lot of Trump's deregulation policy, which actually created a significant amount of the economic growth. So if Biden does win, it'll be a Jimmy Carter situation. Now, your core question is, I think your average ma and pa voter down on Main Street in Topeka, Kansas, they don't have anything to fear. But the activists who have been very forceful for Trump, I don't think they have the same job prospects as a former George W. Bush administration. And I will use Kayleigh McEnany. If she didn't have a wealthy husband, she would probably, would not have the same job prospects. Sarah Sanders didn't go on to do great things after she left, and the same goes for Sean Spicer. He's stuck over on Newsmax. So I mean, I can go on and go on, and but the big one, watch Stephen Miller. Let's see where he goes if Biden takes office. Let's see if they leave Stephen Miller. The big question is, Luke, let's see if the left just leaves these people alone and let them live their lives in a post-Trump presidency if that happens.
Well, no one expects that the left is just going to completely leave everyone alone. The question is, should Trump supporters be terrified? My argument was that you should not be terrified.
Well, I don't think anybody should be terrified. I don't think you should live a life of fear. And of course, my nature, I'm rather aggressive. I refuse to live in fear. But I understand the concept of people who have stuck their neck out, that have, say, jobs at traditionally liberal accounting firms or traditionally liberal law firms, Republicans in blue cities such as Los Angeles and such. I understand their concern that they may be now the subject of just browbeating and social media browbeating to the point that their employers say, we don't want this controversy that you're associated with, whether it's fair or not, you're going to have to go find another job elsewhere. And that happens every day, Luke. You'd be surprised how people can be harassed out of employment simply because the employer, right or wrong, whether the employee is innocent or guilty, just doesn't want to deal with the situation.
I don't think I'd be surprised. It happens every day. Let's say an actor portrays a character who is widely hated, that actor's life is going to become a lot more difficult.
Well, it's happened, Luke.
Exactly. So it happens to a million different people. You become famous. There are always potential downsides to fame, whether you become famous in the Trump administration or you become famous on a TV reality show.
Well, let me just put it this way, Luke. I don't know that anybody on the right even offered or suggested making lists of the Barack Obama people, supporters, and ex-employees to excoriate them and shame them publicly and assure that they cannot go out and support their families. I've never seen the right engage in this conduct. I do not see cities burning. I do not see places I do not see Donald Trump supporters out looting, attacking people on the streets, burning things down because they have projected to lose. So there is also a complete difference in the philosophy and in the people and how they carry themselves. The left has traditionally been criminally oriented, low IQ, lack of impulse control, emotionally driven, and easily manipulated by their race hustlers and propagandists such as Al Sharpton and all those other foghorns. Right-wing people on the right have a more They're a lot like Orthodox Jews, believe it or not, whether they're Jews or Christians or not. The right is a lot like Orthodox Jews. They like order, they like structure, and they don't want to embarrass themselves by engaging in that type of conduct. And I'd be interested in your take on that.
Yeah, the right doesn't do this nearly as much. It's just the right doesn't operate this way. They're not as cohesive. When does the right push an effective boycott? When does the right get people fired for their comments? It happens occasionally, but generally speaking, the left are much more cohesive and much more vengeful.
Absolutely. Absolutely they are. And that goes to the type of people that are now populating the left. I can tell you, in the 90s, the left wasn't that way. I think you'll agree. During the Bill Clinton people, it used to be the Democrats particularly, they would sit and argue. I mean, they would debate with you back and forth because they understood that when all was said and done, we all had to live with each other, and that if your neighbor's house caught on fire, you wanted to be able to give them the garden hose, and likewise, if your house caught on fire, you wanted them to be able to loan you their hose to put the fire out, regardless if they were in opposite political parties. I can assure you now that if you have a Republican and a Democrat living next to each other, they would be hesitant to loan each other the hose if their respective house is on fire. That is how polarized and how extreme it would be, more so on the Democrat side than on the conservative side.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed. So a lot more people regard violence or this kind of retaliation as acceptable for your political enemies than even 2 years ago or even 5 years ago, let alone 10 or 20 years ago. So we are definitely a less cohesive country.
I'll give you a more glaring example, is all of the calls and demands for unity and such from the left right now. And when you bring up the fact that, well, no, why should we unify with people that have said they hated us and then spent 4 years as the quote resistance? We owe you guys 4 years of resistance now. They're like deers in the headlights and crickets. They have no response. That's the best example I get. And I've seen this personally in debates, flame war debates on Twitter and elsewhere, and now even in my own family with a couple of people that voted for Biden. They are just absolutely livid with me because I said I'm not ready to unify with such people. And as far as I'm concerned, we have an obligation to give Biden, if he is seated, 4 years of resistance. And this just goes to show you they have no concept, they have no ownership of their conduct. The left is dominated by what the term situational ethics, Luke. That's what they operate on. And whereas the right, there you see some of that within the right, but the right, the Orthodox Jew analogy that I gave, they're more like, well, we do have to have some degree of consistency. The left doesn't care about consistency or hypocrisy at all.
Right. Well, the Republicans did an excellent job opposing Barack Obama. Barack Obama won a landslide election in 2008, and he got next to zero cooperation from Republicans in Congress, and they effectively stymied his agenda, particularly after 2010. Correct.
And if Biden is allowed to sit in the White House, the Republicans in the Senate. Now, I was very encouraged by Mitch McConnell's speech today. I don't know if you heard his statement on the floor of the Senate.
Yes, yes.
I got in late, but I was very encouraged by that because that gives all indication that the Republican Senate is going to stand by Trump while he mounts these legal challenges. And then I get the solid impression that even if Trump's legal challenges fall short, they are going to give Biden the Obama treatment. And I would go so far as to even, vote down and hold up his cabinet nominations as well.
Right. And so the Republicans have shown that kind of discipline. Not one Republican voted for Barack Obama's health care platform. So not one. It was entirely passed with Democrat votes. So,
well, the thing there, Luke, is at that given time, the Democrats had both the House and Senate, so they were allowed to do that by just modifying the traditional rules and going with a simple majority. Now, Biden, if the Supreme Court, and I suspect they will, strikes down Obamacare as a whole, and Biden tries to do this public option or any of his options, guess what? He doesn't have a Democratic Senate out there to codify what his very limited House does. And people keep talking about Georgia, Georgia, Georgia. Those Georgia Senate seats are going to go Republican because Georgia has that type of jungle primary. There were 2 Republicans in those contested seats besides the 2 people going to runoff. Do you think those Republican votes are going to go Democrat? I don't think so, particularly now with the stakes being as high. So you're going to have probably a 52-48 Republican Senate, and it's going to be far more disciplined, I think, this time if Biden is sitting in the White House.
Right. Also, Trumpism is the path forward for the Republican Party. The only viable path forward for Republicans is to imitate Trump's program of trade protectionism and immigration restriction and become the party of the working man. So that's become the winning formula for the Tories in England, and it's the winning formula for Republicans.
Can you imagine having a Trumpism candidate like Tom Cotton that has the discipline and impulse control that Donald Trump does not? Can you imagine that? And by the way, there are Democratic operatives that are already concerned because they saw not only did they lose congressional seats, they lost state legislature, they lost across the board. And so they are very concerned about 2022, a red wave, finishing off 2022 and the Republicans taking the House in 2022. And then in 2024, having a Trump candidate that may not be Donald Trump unless these rumors of him coming back in 2024 are true. But can you imagine having a Trumpism candidate that has the impulse control and is more articulate than Donald Trump?
Well, that's what wise Democrats, they're absolutely terrified by this election result. They understand that Joe Biden is not going to get anything done. They also understand that in 2022, the House of Representatives will likely tip to the Republicans. And they also understand that Trumpism is the only way forward for the Republican Party. And pretty much any candidate that the Republicans coalesce on in 2024 is going to be much more competent at governing than Donald Trump. So Viktor Orban, the Matteo Salvini in Italy, Viktor Orban in Hungary, there are all these examples of competent populist nationalist politicians who get things done, who govern effectively in Europe. And there's absolutely no reason to believe that the Republicans won't nominate such a person in 2024. And unlike Trump, he will actually be competent and effective.
By the way, just flashed across the TV screen, Luke, the Department of Justice has formally announced an investigation of the voting irregularities in, I think, 3 states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
Yeah, so in the betting markets, Trump was, yesterday he was like a 24-1 shot, and now it's narrowed to 15-1 shot. So what would you give the odds that Donald Trump will be in power January 21 of 2021?
50-50. And the reason why I say 50, I might even say 60-40, and I'll say 60-40 against, because you have to stop, believe it or not, you have to stop voter fraud before those ballots are in. You actually have to have your people in there. You have to have a show of force to those corrupt areas in advance, and Donald Trump didn't do that. But once fraud is baked in the cake, it's very difficult to unbake, get the toothpaste back into the tube. And judges have traditionally, now the difference is, Luke, is Donald Trump has remade the federal judiciary. He has appointed a far better class of judges than what has traditionally been on the federal bench. So keep that as an asterisk to what I'm about to say. It's important that asterisk is noted. Judges have traditionally been scared to death to go in and tinker with what they consider the will of the people. They have been willing to go in and invalidate ballots based on violations of law and illegal process. So that's why I've been saying, very, very early on, they have to focus on the violations of law in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, and Wisconsin, maybe in Arizona, but I haven't been worried about Arizona. Consistently, I've held true on that one. So if you focus on process and violations of law, that gives a judge a better path to go in and say, that's right, this was contaminated. Either do it over, or we're going to throw these votes out. That has happened. But to go in and ask a judge to just carte blanche and validate a bunch of ballots without effectively showing that the process was corrupted or the law was violated in the casting of those votes, you're going to have a hard time.
Yeah. And
I'm just being realistic. You have to be, you can be hopeful as hell, Luke. I am, but you have to be realistic as well. And, they say plan for the, hope for the best, plan for the worst. You have to, be prepared.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
And not be emotional. No, that's good, Luke. I just wanted to call in and, push back a little bit with all due respect, as always.
Great. Good to talk to you, Rodney. Take care, man.
Okay. Have a good evening, Luke.
Okay. Take care.
Okay, Shelby, something I got to ask you, man. You say placating or assuaging white guilt took priority over promoting Black development. That sounds pretty outrageous. I mean, we're going to talk about justice. If the issue is racial justice, what's more important, developing Black people or making white people feel comfortable and not feel guilty? Well, obviously, developing Black people is more important, and yet it came in second place.
Came in a far distant second place. I think, again, the biggest mistake we made is to buy into the idea that our victimization by racism was our source of power, rather than ourself, our skills, our talents, our development. We had just won as victims, we had won a great civil rights movement. The downside is, again, it seduces us. That victory is very seductive. It was racial justice and much needed, but it seduced us into adopting the framework of justice as our way ahead, our way out. And so we missed the fact that the real way out is development. This is the difference between Blacks and Jews. Jews obviously have endured all manner of abuse, Holocaust included, but they never gave up responsibility for their own fate. They went to the Middle East. They created one of the great nations of the last century. If they landed in America from Europe, then and the schools weren't any good, they opened up yeshivas in somebody's basement, and they taught their kids, and their kids were the best educated kids in America, and they kept responsibility for their fate. The tragedy of Black America is we gave up responsibility for our fate in the name of justice. I hate the word justice. It's because on the one, it's a drug. It makes you feel that there's such a thing as justice. But if you really look at the human condition, this is a very rare phenomenon. You can't count on it. Maybe it's going to be there, maybe it's not, but you better not count on it. You better focus on what's in front of you, and what you need to get ahead, what you need to get your family ahead, and so forth. People who do that thrive. If racism is systemic or not, doesn't mean you thrive if you keep responsibility for your own fate.
Shelby, you know how
in LA, I live in LA, in Los Angeles, and we have the second largest school district, LA Unified. We have about 200,000 students in high school, in the high school part. We allow these students to graduate with a 1.0 GPA, which we're practically grading on curve these days anyway. So 1.0 is basically a 0 these days. Well, why are we doing that? And most of the students, they are going to have the 1.0 to graduate, are going to be what we call the brown black belt, mostly Hispanic Black students. And that affects about 20 to 25,000 students per year, which is dumping the kids into society with no skill, with nothing. And so we're not developing the people, but yet the school board will send out a letter every May bragging about the graduation rate. So the school board looks good. They look prestigious. They look like they are doing a great job. But you peel back later, okay, that's 20 to 25,000 students. How do you get the kid back up? Mm-hmm. So even to this day, we're barely, and not one person that talks to you, I cannot publish an op-ed on this in the LA Times. Nobody cares. They don't care. They march for some guy that was brutally murdered in Minnesota. But they don't care about the 20 to 25,000 students.
Well, that's partly because there's this tacit sense that to embrace school to that extent is somehow inauthentic to the race. And if you say that, then you're told that the studies don't support it. And the funniest thing is that the studies that supposedly show that there isn't that disconnect in parts of the Black community between school and themselves, all of those studies actually show it. They demonstrate it very clearly, but the academics insist on interpreting them in what I think of as rather magic ways. But yeah, that means that George Floyd, as tragic as that was, George Floyd and Michael Brown are more important than thousands of kids getting a good education. Yeah, that is a priority that would look weird if we roll the tape and played it again and had a lot of people look, yeah, it's not the way it's supposed to be. It's not the way it would have been if black people had their own yeshivas, so to speak, 100 years ago and even 75 years ago. Then something happens after about 1960, and here we are today.
I want to say something. The slaves who were emancipated in 1863 were largely illiterate. They owned almost no land. They had virtually nothing. By the time you get to 1910, the literacy rate, I can't name the number, but it is one of the historically most impressive transformation of literacy in a population that have been observed in the modern world. So you can't find go to Southeastern Europe, and find some population of poor white people, and you can't find anything comparable to that. We actually made ourselves fit. This is Booker T. Washington's language, but it's actually accurate. Fit for citizenship. The newly emancipated slaves were a very disadvantaged, not only disadvantaged, but underdeveloped population. By the time you get to 1910, you got a wholly different profile of African American population, although there's still a long way to go. We faced up to the challenge of emancipation because we actually had something to prove. There were a lot of doubters who said black folks are not going to make it in the modern world. The European immigrants are going to outcompete them and marginalize them. They're going to die off and whatnot from disease because of, et cetera. And that was all proved to be wrong. And in fact, that population gave rise to a sufficiently robust intellectual and artisan and small business class that we could mount a civil rights movement in the South of the United States and we could change the politics of the country. It seems to me that the present day situation has some similarities. I don't want to quote too many books, but I'm very impressed by Herbert Storing's 1963 essay, The School of Slavery, where he extols the Booker T. Washington program in distinction to the W.E.B. Du Bois program as a development program that seizes the nettle, it grasps the nettle. We have to develop ourselves. We have something to prove. They're sitting there like this, wondering what the Negro is going to do, and we're going to show them that we're a fit for citizenship. The attitude today is, you owe me the citizenship. If you have any doubt, say my crime rate is high, say my school failure rate is high, say my outward birth rate is high, say my incarceration rate is high. If you have any doubts about my fitness, you're a racist. And it strikes me as that there's deep irony in that it leaves us in this position of being appealing to the moral sensibility of a structure of power that our very argument denounces as immoral and incapable of recognizing our humanity. I mean, nobody is coming to save us.
That's right. Yeah, nobody is. We keep appealing to white guilt rather than. And whites, one of the things that is so insidious in all this, because they are trying to get out from under this accusation of evil, of racism. They have learned that the way out is to show deference to blacks, to defer to blacks, to when blacks say what blacks says, whatever they say is meaningful, is the truth. And so deference has become a high value in American life. You see the mayor of Minneapolis give his fire station over to the rioters. It's in what?
Police station.
A police station. To give it up. They give up the center of Seattle. They tolerate riots all over the country to show deference, to show that they are innocent of these. To dissociate themselves from America's ugly racist past. We live off of the white deference. That's what we keep appealing to. So what the University of California cancels the SAT exam, the ACT exam, because of inequality and so forth, and in other words, lowers the standards, wipes out the standards, when we need the standards raised. If anything, you ought to make blacks meet a higher standard than others. Make us better. Help us develop. Help us achieve more. Ask more of us. We have farther to go, farther to come. But everything is orchestrated to lower standards for us. What we demand deference now is justice. We define justice as deference, and it's a symbiotic. They bring out the worst in us, and we bring out the worst in them, and that's where America is today.
But it's corrupt, man, as you have said.
It's totally corrupt.
It's corrupt that everybody's lying to everybody. You think they don't know mediocrity when they see it? I'm talking about white people. You think they don't know undeveloped people to whom they're deferring out of some kind of, etiquette or some sense of seeking absolution? But what do you think they really think? You think they don't know thuggery when they see it? You think what's going on in Philadelphia right now? That people are not sitting there saying this is barbarity? You think they don't know barbarity when they see it?
Keep it up. I said, black, keep it up. Just keep it up. Because white people are going to, at some point, regain their moral confidence, and they will have had it with you. There's going to be a backlash. Everything that goes one way comes back another way. That's just the way of nature. Whites have been shrunken. Their moral authority has been undermined, and they're going to get tired of that. And they're going to say, "Hey, we've given you everything under the."
Okay, that is Shelby Steele, and he's been talking with Glenn Lowry, John McWhorter, and Eli Steele.
Son, you haven't done anything yourself. You don't ask anything of your own people. You don't judge people. How do what about 80% illegitimacy rate? And you want to blame us? With an illegitimacy rate like that, you're destined to forevermore be at the very bottom.
I don't know.
But again, it's that symbiotic sort of thing.
And John wants to dissent.
I think just very gently. I don't see that. That backlash isn't coming anytime soon. And I just think to myself, Ibram Kendi. Do you know he gets $20,000 a pop? $20,000 to quote unquote go somewhere. Nowadays, just on Zoom, he's just sitting in his house. He gets $20,000 for 45 minutes, where he sits and tells adoring white people utter and complete nonsense. Some of the things in his book are things like, instead of there being grades, because school is racist, and the way we know it's racist is because black kids don't tend to do as well in it, we need to start evaluating students on things like their desire to know. What the hell is that? And yet that's being treated as wisdom because he is black and he has dreadlocks and he's cool. And he happens to have, taken this moment. And I'm not saying that he's supposed to turn down the money, but the fact is he's being asked to do this. And people are taking him seriously, or they're pretending to take him seriously. And that includes teenagers. And so it seems to me that the white guilt is such a drug that careers like that can be started. And I wish I could see the end of it coming, but I don't. Anyway, go ahead.
Do you think that white guilt is fading at all?
I think there's going to be a backlash against the extremes of 2020. I think that the hard left wokeness is so ridiculous in so many ways and so nasty that I think there's going to be a backlash against that. But the general sense that we are not full human beings, the general sense that what makes you a good white person is to basically listen to anything people like, Kendi, et cetera, say, I don't think that's going to go away. That's become established as their way of evaluating themselves as good moral actors. I'm not sure what would stop it.
But don't you want to take account of the diversity of the country? I mean, you could say that Donald Trump is in part an indication of a leading edge of a backlash that might build. I mean, he will come and he will go. He might lose this election and he'll be gone. But the sentiment that Black Lives Matter is a Marxist organization and that the politically correct catechism of the campuses and the elite newsrooms is anathema to the basis of what makes America a great country, that sentiment is not going to go away. It's out there, man.
If that's going to put it like
I argue that. Go ahead. I argue that Trump has a certain charisma in the black community precisely because he has no white guilt. He's a white man with no guilt, who looks at blacks and says, "What do you got to lose? Get with it." That's good, and he's beginning to peel off considerable black voters. Obviously, going to be very important in this election, and he looks like he may do very well with it.
We'll see. But the reaction of these rappers does give some indication that what you're saying, there's something to it.
Okay, so that's discussion. Glenn Lowry, John McWhorter, Ellie Steele, and Shelby Steele. James Hunt says in the chat, Luke, what is the race realist response to black progress in the first half of the 20th century? I think they feel very comfortable with what statistics say and how that accords with their understanding of human biodiversity. I don't think there are levels of black intellectual accomplishment that are shaking people who are race realists to their core. And on the general issue of election integrity, I don't believe that either Democrats or Republicans are more committed to free and fair elections. I believe both parties want to manipulate the elections to their own benefit. Then I wanted to add and discuss with Rodney, I forgot to discuss it with Rodney, just how impressive Trump's level of control of the Republican Party is, that no major Republican politicians are speaking out against Trump's attempts to make legal challenges to the 2020 election results. Like, Trump has crushed the Republican Party and pretty much has it in his hand, and the Republican Party is overwhelmingly going along with his wishes. And it's interesting. Okay, Mitt Romney did, but Mitt Romney is very much an outlier. And it's interesting that Trump's odds are zooming up on PredictIt. So according to PredictIt, Trump has a 14% chance of effectively winning the 2020 election. And even George W. Bush said that there's nothing wrong with Trump following all legal challenges to this latest election. Let's play a little more here from Dennis Prager.
He is the author of Stealing Elections, How Voter Fraud Threatens Our Democracy.
John Fund.
Gee. Now, why would I be having John Fund on now? He's also the author of Who's Counting? How Fraudsters and Bureaucrats Put Your Vote at Risk.
The reason you're having John Fund on now is because you don't know anything. You don't know how this guy completely lacks credibility on this topic.
Actually, he's the dean of election experts in America. John Fund.
He's the dean of election experts in America? He's a joke. He's pathetic. He is being repeatedly discredited.
Fund. I won't even ask, how are you? I'll just say hi.
I got some sleep the last couple of days.
Is that a good sign? As opposed to...
Sleep is good.
Sleep is good. That is correct. I don't get much sleep, but I'm lucky. I'm I'm almost like Donald Trump on the sleep issue. I don't need a lot. Anyway, John, I have no idea what you will say, truly, but I simply respect you so much. I want to get your take. If you had to bet your right leg, do you believe, would you vote that, would you?
And when you respect someone who is effectively a buffoon, it shows your lack of judgment. This is why Paul Gottfried calls something like an intellectual charlatan. That wasn't the no. He calls Paul Gottfried calls Dennis Prager an intellectual vulgarian. Dennis Prager also respects Malcolm Gladwell, okay, who is the Malcolm Gladwell is a nothing when it comes to intellectual acuity. Malcolm Gladwell is great at telling stories, but he has no wisdom. So, yeah, I think that Paul Gottfried is 20 times more profound than Dennis Prager when it comes to political analysis.
Bet that this was an honest result or not?
Depends on the state. Most of the country voted very smoothly. Most of the country voted well. Most of the country didn't have major problems. But where there were people who wanted there to be problems, who planned to have problems, who engineered problems, there were problems.
Were there enough problems to have determined the election?
Maybe, but can you prove them before December 8th when states certify the votes and name their electors to the Electoral College? Highly.
You don't need to prove them. You just need to win in court. You don't win in court always because you prove something. You win in court because there are all sorts of factors that go into winning. You don't win football games always because you're the best team. The Dallas Cowboys were the best team against the Pittsburgh Steelers yesterday. So the Cowboys had a 2-6 record going up against the 7-0 Pittsburgh Steelers. The Cowboys were the better team. They got robbed by the refs. The Cowboys played the best game, but the winner was the Pittsburgh Steelers because they were benefited by bad calls by the referees. So in court cases, you often win even though you have an inferior case. O.J. Simpson was declared not guilty by a jury, even though he was as guilty as sin.
Doubtful.
Right. So I'm not asking what will work. I'm just asking, and it's really an open question. I believe, I did not know last week, but the more I have read, the more I have become suspicious of the results in states like Pennsylvania.
And what has he read? He's read things from the echo chamber.
And Michigan and so on, Wisconsin.
Yes, and I am also suspicious. Count me as suspicious.
Were there enough shenanigans to alter the result?
Well, Dennis, I'm going to have to give you a different answer, which is this. In March and April, when we had COVID, the left immediately sprang into action.
Okay, so let me go back here. And Rodney Martin.
Well, Luke, I heard my name and I heard your point, and I'll give you just 2 minutes and let you get back to the show.
Great.
But a couple of things. Donald Trump's, when you say control over the Republican Party, also Susan Collins congratulated President-elect Biden. Just letting you know. So there's two, Mitt Romney, an outlier, Susan Collins, another one. And I think there's a third, but nothing substantial. You had the Senate Majority Leader go to the floor of the Senate and double down for Donald Trump, in the upper house of the American, the U.S. legislative branch. That's impressive. But that stems from the realignment, and we've talked about this on your show, how the Republican Party has realigned. And that scares the bejeebies out of what's left of, we'll say, the Republican establishment, the Republican House, not the House Representatives, but there are some senators that are all in from the beginning. Tom Cotton from the very beginning, Langford, Lindsey Graham moved that way. And in fact, Lindsey Graham just donated $500,000 of surplus campaign dollars to Trump's legal effort. So, but where Trump is getting this immense, what you would call control, and I will call it influence, is because the Republican base has completely realigned And all Trump has to do is do as he did with Jeff Flake and have a primary challenger to a disloyal sitting member of Congress or the Senate and endorse that primary challenge. Now, people have brought up the fact that there's been a few times where the Trump-endorsed candidate has lost. Those have been outliers. The fact that he chased a sitting senator in Arizona, Jeff Flake, out of the race by simply endorsing who would have been normally a weak challenger, speaks volumes. Where is Justin Amash today, by the way? He was a congressman that kept running his mouth and standing up to Trump and was a darling of the left. Anytime a Republican is a darling to the left, I get suspicious, by the way, even if they tend to call themselves conservative. But this immense control, what you call control, I call influence, stems from a new Republican Party. Not even Ronald Reagan wielded this type of influence over the Republican base. I mean, the Republican base sat there and took it up the hind end when Reagan signed an immigration bill that is responsible for the mess that we're in today, even though they kind of didn't like it. The base at the time, the corporate base, the populist base, the everyday Joes, they have always been rendered moot. And where you first saw them raise their head was Pat Buchanan's challenge against George H.W. Bush. That's where you saw the true revolt begin. In the New Hampshire primary, Pat Buchanan got 40% of the vote in the New Hampshire primary against George H.W. Bush. There was the indicator that Trump Trumpism was rising and that the Republican Party was realigning, and so on. So all Donald Trump did was provide the needed charisma, and Trump does have charisma. It's a different type of charisma. It's the fact that he sits up there at those rallies and talks to people like he's sitting across the table from you or at a bar with you, and he talks to you in normal jargon. And that is incredibly, connecting to the Republican base. They feel like they know him. Here they consider a billionaire, a guy that sits on a golden toilet in Trump Tower, as being one of the folks, kind of an insider that is attacking, the system as a whole. Now, whether or not you agree that everything that he's done, and I certainly have had my criticisms, has been in that vein, that's another matter. But the fact is, he has established this connection. And what the left is scared, now they're even, really terrified with McConnell. McConnell is getting excoriated right now by the left and all over the internet and on left-wing news, the fact that they are going to hold firm. And then this Justice Department investigation, they just may think that the House of Cards is collapsing. And then, the great big issue there is Trump's supporters and the Republican base. If he refuses to concede and says fight on and resist, Biden and the left have a significant problem.
Okay, thanks, Rodney.
Okay.
And said, aha, we now have the excuse, we have the cover to immediately and quickly and dramatically change the way America votes. Because everyone is going to be scared of COVID. We can tell them don't go to the polls. We're all going to switch immediately to an all-mail election in state after state. This was planned chaos. They knew that our election system isn't equipped to go to that transition that quickly. So if you go from 20% of the vote cast early or absentee to 60 or 65, you're going to have massive problems. You're going to have a tsunami of ballots. And in that tsunami of ballots, you're not going to have the same safeguards and oversight and verification that you would normally have. And that is where the thesis of my first book 20 years ago began, when I said what we really have to fear in this country is a situation of planned chaos in our elections where you can't tell where the incompetence ends and the fraud begins.
Why some states and not others?
Some states weren't close. I mean, do you really want to invest resources in making sure that New Mexico goes to all-mail elections? No, we know how New Mexico is going to vote. Do you really want to be making sure how North Dakota is going to vote? No, we know how North Dakota is going to vote. They targeted and picked the states where they changed the election rules.
But so there wasn't mass mail-in New Mexico or North Dakota?
Well, there was greater, but the point is the dramatic shift in Pennsylvania was from 4% of the vote cast early or absentee to over 50. Pennsylvania, of course, was the critical state of any state of the country. In California, it didn't so much matter. They've already gone to basically all mail-in voting. But in states where it really counted, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, you can predict the states as much as I can. Nevada, the shift was dramatic, and it overloaded the system, and it meant a lot of things could happen behind the curtain that we'll never know about.
So, is it fair to say? I'll put on your analyst hat now. Is it fair to say that about half this country, for the first time in American history, does not believe a presidential election was fair? We'll be back with John Fund in a moment. Hey, everybody, Dennis Prager here. By the way, I do want to remind you, this is good news. We need it. And that is we're having another Stand with Israel.
Dennis, Democrats didn't think the year 2000 election was fair. They thought that Al Gore had been robbed. Come on, man. Come on, man. Just when I was getting ready to play Dennis. What the heck, man? Come on, man. What's this malarkey? What's this malarkey? Yes, continue. Come on.
That's a long time from now. What is this? I have no idea. We're November, so that's 6 months from now. It's completely refundable till then.
Oh, come on,
If
man.
you need to cancel for any reason, call 855 the estimable John Fund, National Affairs columnist, National Review, author of 2 books on voter fraud and cheating. So I asked you to have your analyst hat on, and I asked you, John, right before is this unprecedented that half the country might not believe a presidential result?
I haven't seen the polling data that would show that. I do know that there was about 40% of the country before the election that expressed concerns about the accuracy and the completeness of the result. But you may have better polling data than I do.
I have no polling data.
I don't know if that's true or not.
Okay, fair enough. So let us say it's 35%. And in other words, that almost half of Trump voters do believe that Joe Biden won honestly. It would still be tens of millions of Americans who don't believe that. Would that be unprecedented?
No, I suspect half of Al Gore supporters in 2000 believed the same thing after the Bush v. Gore recount. We'll get over this, but it does show that we have a fundamental problem with our system. We take it for granted. We don't ensure its accuracy, its completeness, or its speed, frankly. In fact, we have slower election results than we've had in 100 years. So we do have lots of things to worry about, but there's no crisis of legitimacy.
Good. I hope you're right. I don't fully believe that the Gore situation is parallel. First of all,
it's parallel only that Al Gore voters believed it was. That's all.
No, that's very fair. But they didn't believe that there was voter fraud. They believed that there was a political manipulation in the Supreme Court with regard to Florida Supreme Court voting.
Fair enough.
So, okay, that's all I'm saying. You're right that there was a large body of people who didn't believe in the result, but their reasoning was different from the reasoning today. Is that fair to say?
I think you're correct.
Okay, so now that was the point, the one that I wanted to make. So I began by asking you if you had to bet your right leg. By the way, I've reflected on it, or left leg. I just want
Actually, I always prefer to bet my extreme right leg.
That's very cute. That's your non-woke leg. Your non-woke leg. That's fair enough. So if it's an unfair question, that's fine. I'm not going to belabor the point. It sounds to me like whether through incompetence or direct cheating, you're skeptical of some of the states.
Yes, and the problem that we face as a practical matter is this. This is not a governor's race. This is not a Senate race or a school board race. This is the presidency. It operates under a different set of rules, the Electoral College. What that means is that by December 8th, which is less than 30 days from now, the states must certify and send the names of the Electoral College members to Washington. And on December 14th, the Electoral College meets, and they elect the president. And the time frame here for all of the normal complaints, the lawsuits, the gathering of evidence of irregularities, is very truncated. It's less than 30 days, and it's extremely difficult to present a huge body of evidence that's compelling to judges to not just not certify an election, but to overturn an election and give it to another candidate.
The president has made reference frequently to going to the Supreme Court. What would he go to the Supreme Court with?
Well, there's an example where I think he might win. In Pennsylvania, the rogue Supreme Court there, the state Supreme Court, ignored state law. They said you can send in ballots 3 days after the election. They don't have to be postmarked. They don't even have to have a signature verification. That's outrageous. The Supreme Court tied before the election 4-4 on whether that case was right for hearing. I think it's very likely the Supreme Court may look at that case in the next week or 10 days. The problem is we know the number of ballots that were sent in that way because the Friday deadline has passed, and it's probably not enough to affect the outcome.
Yeah, that's what exactly. Is there any other case the Supreme Court, in your eyes, would take?
If there's clear and compelling evidence and state courts do not provide relief, if, for example, in Nevada, where I think there was real hanky-panky, if it was shown that 30,000 people who moved out of state after they lost their jobs on the Las Vegas Strip after COVID actually voted and they shouldn't have, and there was compelling evidence of that, that might be an example. But it's extremely difficult to assemble that case in a few days.
Right. So finally, I don't need a quick one because of the time frame. The Libertarian Party candidate, Joe Jorgensen, exceeded Joe Biden's margin over President Trump in 4 states. Do you think that had an impact on the outcome?
This is one of the great myths of American politics.
All right, I'll have to hold you on. I have no idea what he's going to say. John Fund is my guest. I'm Dennis Prager. Appreciable review, 2 books on voter fraud, stealing elections, and who's counting. Obviously, well worth your time. So, John Fund, I asked you about the difference between Biden and Trump in 4 swing states was actually less than the number of votes the Libertarian candidate for president got. Is she and that party a spoiler?
We'll never know, but I'm skeptical, and the following reason. The people who raise this argument are individualists. They believe people have individual action. They make up their own minds. But their argument is cited in a collective interpretation.
I just wish
people think for themselves.
Discussions and debates in areas where we can all agree on the basics of reality, but
about
instead
35, maybe 40% of people who vote that way would not vote at all if there wasn't a choice on the ballot. In other words, they really are expressing their dissatisfaction with the two-party system monopoly. Secondly, the best data we have, incomplete, is that about 20 or 25% of people who vote Libertarian have privacy concerns about national security, Snowden-type concerns, marijuana legalization, euthanasia, all kinds of social issues that lean them to the left. They're left Libertarians, and they would probably, all things being equal, vote for Biden. A big chunk of Libertarians would vote for Trump. For reasons of taxes, regulation, and because Trump is less interventionist.
It's not enough that now they might have an opportunity. They might have a
all of the Libertarian votes to Donald Trump is a dangerous philosophical presumption.
Would you assign nearly all the Green Party votes to the Democrats?
No. The best guess is about 40% of them would vote for nobody at all. They wouldn't vote for president. About 20% hate the Democrats because they view them as real sellouts, and they might vote for a Republican. And a whole bunch probably would vote for Joe Biden. But the Democrats are very smart this year, Dennis. They kicked off the ballot in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and other states, the Green Party. They disqualified them.
And,
all right. Of legal fees to do that.
Was that honest?
Well, they won in court. I'd say it's sneaky, but not illegal.
John Fund, thank you so much.
Yeah, John, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, let's listen to Ann Coulter here.
Ann, are you with us?
Yes, hello, hello.
There you are.
Good to be here, John Phillips.
Good to hear your voice. Now, we had big news this morning that the vaccine could be out in the ether, out on the market pretty soon, and 90% effective. Do you think it's a coincidence that we were told this 2 days after they called the election for Biden?
Actually, I don't, though it is unfortunate for the president. I've been hearing about this vaccine from some of my doctor friends for a few weeks now. They thought it was going to come right before the election, but I had been warned. It's imminent, it's imminent, it's imminent. I mean, maybe they waited a few days. I suppose that's possible. But I knew this was coming. I'm delighted it's coming, and I'm delighted with the results of the election.
Wait, you're happy?
Ecstatic. I couldn't have designed a better outcome. Now, that's contingent on Georgia. So any of you who care about your country should be donating or driving to Georgia, donating to Purdue and Loeffler in Georgia. I think another 4 years of Trump would have destroyed us. It would have been, as you predicted from the beginning, I might add. Your fear with Trump was always he's going to be Schwarzenegger. He runs on these populist issues, and then he gets into office, and he just wants liberals to like him. Well, that's basically what we got with Trump when he was facing re-election. Can you imagine what he would have been like without the threat of his voters crossing their arms and saying, which, incidentally, they did. They did, thanks to enough of them did, thanks to the genius political strategizing of Jared Kushner. Yes, they got black votes up. I think they would have gotten black votes up in any event. Who are the main victims of the crime wave that has swept America since the Black Lives Matter movement? Of course, black people. Hispanic Americans didn't turn out every place, but they did in Florida and in Texas. Who are the main, for the Texas ones, who are the main victims of illegal immigration driving down wages? The legal immigrants who have those jobs now and see their jobs being taken, their wages being driven down or jobs taken. I believe it is the 2 largest Hispanic counties in the country, 2 counties down on the Mexican border. So it's basically all Mexicans in these 2 counties. Both went for Trump this year, and they did not 4 years ago. They are the victims of illegal immigration. They're also the victims of Black Lives Matter riots. So I don't think it's anything, Jared's outreach efforts and meeting with Kanye that slightly increased the black and Hispanic vote. Meanwhile, as has been the Republican Party's policy for my entire lifetime, non-college educated whites were completely ignored, the most hated group in America. Finally, Trump spoke to them in 2016. He sure didn't once he got elected. What's the single demographic where Trump's percentage went down. He went up with, let me mention, with Muslims, with gays, with women, with Hispanics, with blacks. What group did he go down with? White men. Thank you, Jared Kushner. So I'm so happy to have the Kushners and Ivankas out of the White House. And yet Trumpism won, where Republicans had stunning victories down ballot. The Democrats, I'm sorry, your listeners probably heard this a million times by now. Democrats were expected to pick up 15 seats in the House. That's what Nancy Pelosi said. That's what all the pollsters said. Well, we've already picked up, 7 House seats, and there could be more. They were going to flip Texas. They were going to flip South Carolina. They were going to flip Ohio. They were going to flip Iowa. We were losing Susan Collins and Lindsey Graham. Not that I love them, but none of that happened. And as long as we win the 2 runoffs in Georgia, Republicans control the Senate, and all of our worst-case scenarios, the things that kept people like you and me and probably your listeners up at night, D.C. statehood, Puerto Rican statehood, or Puerto Rico statehood, amnesty, bailouts for all of the high-spending, poorly run blue states, racial quotas for prison. That's not happening as long as we have a Republican Senate. So again, I say please donate to David Perdue, Kelly Loeffler in Georgia. The runoff is January 5th. Otherwise, Chuck Schumer is going to be the Senate Majority Leader.
Now, I'm totally with you on being disappointed that the wall wasn't built. That was certainly the
It's
centerpiece.
way more than that. That's merely representative.
But here's what he did do, and this is what I like. One of the things that Republicans like to do, and Democrats for that matter, is they run around the globe looking for wars to get involved with. Whether it was Iraq and Afghanistan for W, certainly the Democrats started things in Vietnam. Presidents like to do that. For whatever reason, that's the way the deep state pushes them. That's the way the permanent bureaucracy pushes them. And it takes a strong voice to say no to the generals. It takes a strong voice to say, no, we're not going to do that. He did go after Libya at one point. Was it Libya or Syria? One of the two.
Syria, he wanted to assassinate Assad.
Okay. So he gave in on that one, but that was brief. Outside of that, we didn't start any new wars, which to me is a great victory. Just the fact that we're not going around the globe looking for that. The other thing, and you can thank Mitch McConnell for this because Mitch McConnell's the one who cares about it more than just about anyone in D.C. The judges that they put on were magnificent. You look at these people that Bush gave us. And you called it on Roberts. You called it very early on that man was a Judas, and you were right. But now it almost doesn't even matter because we have 3 very solid judges on the court, and not just there, but those lower courts that have rulings that impact all of our lives also have great judges too, and that will exist moving on into the future for generations.
Yes. You're absolutely right on both points, though. Trump did not bring the troops home as he promised, which carried him to victory in the South Carolina primary. And one piece of good news, we'll see what happens since Biden seems to be like another Robert Mueller. I shouldn't laugh about it. It's kind of sad. But, his rep is as Mr. Lunch Bucket Joe and moderate Democrat. So presumably at least some of the staffers around him agree with that approach. In any event, I was reading yesterday one of these deep state foreign policy types, I forget who it was, I think it was Robert Gates, was denouncing Biden, saying he has been wrong on every foreign policy decision for the last 50 years. Keep reading. And one of the examples was that when he was Obama's vice president, his proposal on Afghanistan was just to leave a skeleton force there to prevent terrorism. But no, Obama stood up to him and just poured in troops. So that's good news on the starting wars front. We'll see. But he
is an internationalist. He's someone who's going to want to get involved, and he's going to have the social justice warrior crowd in his ear. So he may not get involved in a war to protect the oil market.
So this is Ann Coulter speaking today on KBC Radio in Los Angeles.
But he may get involved in a war to advance some sort of racial equality or whatever, religious persecution.
But we'll see that. I think Americans have spoken pretty clearly on being tired of wars, and Democrats disregard that to their peril. Ditto with all of the woke crap, which obviously is what led to the red wave. It's curious that the only person I had thought, now that it's over, I'm not demoralizing anyone, I'm not harming anyone's vote. Basically 1 year in, I was telling all of my friends privately, he's going to lose. He's governing like Jeb. He ran like Superman, and now he's blown it all off and governing like Jeb. Then the riots came, the Black Lives Matter riots, peaceful protests, the Antifa riots, and I thought, oh my gosh. But then he didn't do anything. He kept tweeting law and order. That is the symbol of Trump's entire presidency. He thinks when he says something, that's the same as doing it.
And Rodney Martin sends along an article from New York Magazine, Say Goodbye to Trump's Lesser Ghouls. And below, an incomprehensive list of the worst Trump officials you've probably forgotten about. Better memorize their names now before they all disappear into lucrative consultancies. So I think this argues for my case that they're going to be okay more than for the other case, because here's a list noting that you're very likely to forget about these people and need to make a special effort to memorize them because they will soon disappear into lucrative consultancies. So my main point is I don't believe that there's going to be any widespread purge of Trump supporters, that tens of thousands, millions of Trump supporters are going to get fired and terrified and sent into re-education camps. I don't believe that's going to happen.
Build a wall, law and order. And apparently Jared assured him, oh, yeah, this will be great. The riots are going to help us, just like they helped Nixon, with, Anne frantically waving her hands. Nixon wasn't president then. But Americans, particularly minority Americans who live in many of the neighborhoods where the looting is taking place, probably a majority of those neighborhoods, they don't like having their neighborhood stores smashed up. So who benefited from that? Basically, every Republican on the ballot except the President of the United States, who did nothing but tweet law and order.
Well, he did offer the National Guard, and a lot of these mayors refused it. That's what happened here in Los Angeles. I'm not convinced that Joe Biden's going to even offer up the National Guard.
We'll see. But one of the other advantages of my fantasy results election, which I could never have dreamed could be this perfect, is generally it's very hard to take out an incumbent. I don't think it's going to be as hard to take out Kamala in 4 years. She was polling at 2% in the Democratic primaries. She was picked because she meted the, extremely rigorous criteria of being a female of color. That cackle is enraging. No one will be able to primary her because, again, a woman of color. As long as Republicans, and by the way, Republicans will likely pick up some House seats in 2 years. I'm not sure about the Senate. That will probably stay about the same, but that would be great if we picked up a seat. We should have a very good year in 2024 in terms of the Senate. The Democrats have more seats up than we do. But as long as we run Trumpism without the Trump, a populist Republican, I'm not enthusiastic about the senators. Some of them are very good, but they're a little too prissy. No, I want a manly man, somebody like Gianforte, who was just elected governor of Montana. Remember, he punched a reporter the day before his election to the House?
Oh, yeah, the special.
Yeah, I love that guy. DeSantis, the governor of Florida, he has blue-collar appeal. I don't think we want – I don't mean to diss these guys, but I don't think we want a Josh Hawley or Ted Cruz type. Plus, generally, historically, it hasn't been true recently, historically, governors do better anyway. So as long as we run a populist Republican, I think Republicans stand a very good chance in 2 years. And as long as we keep Georgia, in the two runoffs, Democrats cannot do any of the crazy stuff that has been giving us nightmares. 4 more years of Trump would have been an unmitigated disaster. I think he might have signed an amnesty. He might have signed a bill. Remember when he said, oh, I'll stand up to the NRA, you can't? without having to face re-election. Oh, my gosh, John, it would have been a disaster.
What do you think of that governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem? I like her a lot because she refused to shut that state down from the very beginning.
I like her. I don't want... you'll think I'm joking, but I'm not joking. I don't want a female to run at the top of the ticket, probably not even as vice president. We're not some formerly great nation like Britain. We're the superpower of the world. We need a man at the helm.
But a lot of the men backed down and they shut their states down. She didn't.
No, I agree with that. I think I'm tougher than a lot of men, and I don't think. And it's a very, very small state. It's a very, very conservative state. Maybe an excellent cabinet position. Also, we need good governors out there. But no, I'm much more fond of Gianforte or DeSantis, and there are others out there. But I think we're going to be looking at governors. The most important thing is, and oh my gosh, the old guard GOP is going to be pushing back, demanding more wars, less manufacturing, more immigration. We have to watch these Republicans like a hawk. Trumpism won, Trump lost. If you kept his promises, you know what? I just want to throw in one other thing because you'll remember this, and I hope a lot of your listeners. If Trump had kept his promises, this would have been Reagan in '84. There would have been no stopping him.
How long do you think Biden is going to last as president?
I was thinking about that. I think longer than we're expecting. I mean, obviously, there's probably a movement afoot in the Kamala Harris camp to push him aside, perhaps in the Nancy Pelosi camp. But, as I say, he's been in politics for 47 years. He's had a lot of loyal aides working for him. They're not going to want him pushed aside. Jill Biden is not going to want him pushed aside. So until, and also, maybe they'll come up with another excuse to put him in the basement for the next election. I think that really helps Biden. For a normal presidential election, it would have been a disaster to have your candidate hiding in the basement. I'm sorry, that sounds partisan and propagandistic. Okay, he wasn't hiding. But spending the entire campaign in his basement would not have been good. In this case, I think it was good because nobody loves Biden. The presidential race was 100% a referendum on Trump. And he didn't have enough of his side. Again, only one demographic group voted in a smaller percentage for Trump than in 2016, white men. He promised to bring their jobs back. He promised to get tough on China. He promised to build a wall, to deport illegal aliens, to defund sanctuary cities, to end anchor babies day one. And there was a little more foreign meddling than you remember. We bombed Syria twice, killing innocent civilians. Remember when, what's his name? The NBC guy who comes on at 11.
Brian Williams?
Yes, the fantasist, Brian Williams. Remember when we're bombing Syria and he was just ecstatic. Look, those beautiful bombs. I forget what he said, but it was some ridiculous poetic thing. No, the entire deep state and media were totally into bombing Syria. Trump was so proud of himself. Oh, my approval ratings have gone up. Then the UN, they were supposed to have used, the reason for the bombing, they were supposed to have used chemical weapons. The UN spent 8 months looking at the tissues in the corpses. No nerve gas had been used. We bombed civilians for no purpose. That's his big, keep us out of wars. And he did it again. He did that twice. He wanted to assassinate Assad. Yes, he didn't start any new wars. Congratulations. Who thought it would be this hard? But he did not keep his promises on bringing the troops home. He did not keep his promises on not intervening in the Middle East. How about a little more attention focused on America? The campaign theme was America first, not what can we do to help the Middle East?
All right. Ann Coulter, thank you so much for stopping by. Always a pleasure. You can read her columns online at anncoulter.com.
Okay, Ann Coulter also today
Good to be
on
here,
the John
John
Phillips
Phillips.
Show.
Good to hear your voice. Now, we had big news this morning that the vaccine could be out in the ether, out on the market pretty soon, and 90% effective. Do you think it's a coincidence that we were told this 2 days after they called the election for Biden?
Actually, I don't, though. It is unfortunate for the president. I've been hearing.
Okay, that's the same guy. Let's get another clip here from Ann Coulter recently.
Hello, guys. Welcome back. $1 billion was one of Trump's key.
Whoops. That's not a good one. Okay. Why did Trump's voter base shrink in 2020? And
correction, not illegal immigration. I'm talking about all immigration.
All immigration.
Yes, I am. And that poll you just cited is part of the media's effort to convince Republicans of what you just said, which is how Republicans are going to keep losing. The way Republicans win is by driving up the white vote. It is not by appealing to women or Hispanics or blacks. In fact, those groups are going to start fighting among one another. When blacks
So you would write off the Hispanic American
Not write
vote?
off, but how about for once appealing to your base? The Democrats don't obsess on how do we get gun rights voters to support us a tiny bit more? How do we get pro-lifers to support us? Let's get a slice of the evangelicals. The Republicans have been tricked into a suicidal electoral strategy. If Romney had gotten 71% of the Hispanic vote, which, by the way, Bush didn't get. He got, what, 30?
40,
no, it was less than 40. But he didn't get 51. And if you're not getting 51%, you're losing.
Okay.
And that was turning his entire White House over into an Hispandering operation.
Here's how I see
Wait a second. Let me just finish the one Romney thing. If Romney had won 71% of the Hispanic vote, he still loses. If he had got 4 points more of the white vote, he would have won. What's the one thing we know isn't going to happen? Whatever Trump just promised.
This is, in your view, political life or death for him. You think that if he doesn't deliver for the strong base of the party that voted for him and that cares about these issues, that he'll suffer in 2020.
Yes, and frankly, he deserves it. All of his major promises were things he did not need the Congress for. So this nonsense he keeps tweeting out. One of the things that was beautiful about the Trump campaign, man, that was a great campaign. If only, oh my gosh, if only he governed 1% of the way he campaigned. Immigration is the president's responsibility. He can ban anybody he wants. He can ban redheads. He can ban tall people. He can ban short people, as the Supreme Court found with his, quote, Muslim ban. So most of the things, building the wall, protecting the border. I mean, everyone seems to accept that he can bomb innocent people in Syria without checking with Congress, but he can't protect our actual border. I mean, I wish he'd read Adios America again. And I mean, look, we did trust him. I trusted him. The angel moms trusted him. Both parties are just responding to the donors. And it was never so clear as in that 2016 campaign. And Trump struck such a chord with the issues that he has completely abandoned since being president. I think Trump is going to have a very difficult time keeping his base together as things stand right now. Look, I happen to love his tweets, but tweets aren't action. We voted for results. We voted for a builder who promised a wall. A builder. We've always had, like, a former vice president, a general, a governor. We voted for a builder. We wanted a wall. And he just keeps talking. And then it never happens. And for viewers who are thinking to themselves, okay, Miss Coulter, we knew Trump was a con man liar. Why did you write In Trump We Trust? He was the only one saying the things we wanted said. And weirdly, the fact that he was not the typical elegant politician, it made him more believable because we had been lied to so many times by traditional politicians. Maybe this is what we need. Then he gets to the White House and all he wants is for the New York Times and the fancy people to like him. I've gone from thinking 10% chance to save the country when I wrote Adios America, 90% chance to save the country the night Trump was elected president. Now I'm down to about 1%.
You have been talking about the president as if he had absolutely broken every promise on the campaign trail.
No, I think I've been quite clear about which promises he has broken. To build a wall and deport illegals. So when it comes to immigration, there's no one in the White House giving him good advice. Everyone, it is 10 feet deep with people who oppose the wall, who want to amnesty dreamers, and none of that's
Someone
happening.
has convinced this president that DACA is not a Democratic issue, but one that he concedes from the Democrats. And I happen to agree with you here. Whoever's advising that somehow Hispanics and illegal immigrants will convert suddenly to the Republican Party, well, first of all, they must drink with Paul Ryan in order to get that delusional.
Or Karl Rove.
They're absolute fools.
Yes.
Okay. So, and by the way, those fools are often funded by the person you mentioned, Karl Rove, and all of his buddies at the Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable.
But more important even than the trade issue was obviously the promise to build the wall. He has the authority. He needs to listen to the right people. And I mean, the Washington Post just reported that Pentagon official says we can't build the wall without congressional approval. The guy's a moron, and you shouldn't be listening to drooling, incontinent morons when you're fulfilling your most
Who
crucial...
are you calling a moron?
Well, unfortunately, the Washington Post didn't...
John Kelly, when he was chief of staff for Trump, would try to reduce Trump watching Lou Dobbs because he thought Lou Dobbs was a conspiracy theorist.
Identified Pentagon official. Though I'm demanding
there's only
his
one
name.
person over there who could make that such a bold statement, wouldn't we think? But certainly General Mattis would not, because I'm certain he wouldn't want.
It was Pentagon official. Who knows? It could be Jerry
Well, he is
Kushner.
the one official that
because he's running the entire government. As soon as
briefly,
he gets to the White House, suddenly all he wants is the approval of the Manhattan fancy people. He sure didn't care for the 18 months he was running. So the shallow course ignoramus, yes, it was a selling point because he didn't care what people thought of him. Now all he wants is for Goldman Sachs to like him.
Yeah, well,
I don't know what happened, but that's a different president. I haven't changed.
Approbation.
That isn't what people voted for. We voted for a wall, for enforcement of our immigration laws, for not being the world's policeman, for ending NAFTA. Unfortunately, we're not getting what we voted for. Well, of course, I blame the Republicans in Congress the most, but we always knew that. I knew they were traitors, again, working for the lobbyists, the Chamber of Commerce, and Wall Street, and not for the American people. And we knew that Trump would have a tough row to hoe, but he was supposed to go down and be a bull in a china shop, and we're still waiting for the bull in the china shop. But so far, I mean, that budget deal, it was like a George Soros practical joke, spending $18 million to study misogyny in the Marines, funding for a wall specifically prohibited, funding for, Planned Parenthood. No, this isn't what we voted for, and I do think Trump meant what he said. You wouldn't go through what he went through for 18 months, being attacked by both political parties, the entire media, the Washington bureaucracy. It is tough what he's up against, but that's what he promised, and that's what we want. And I think the media really has been misportraying Trump's appeal. It is about the issues. It's a libel of the voters to say they just want somebody coming along, being politically incorrect. It is the issues that both parties have refused to address, and most of all, the topic of my last book, immigration. Whenever I see, these great names in punditry trying to analyze Donald Trump's appeal, I'll always just, search for the word immigration. If they don't mention that, they're lying. Of course that's what it is. Of course that's what it is. And look at how he's being attacked by both Republicans and Democrats. We've gone from, more than 20 million manufacturing jobs in the 80s to a little more than 10 million now, and that's with a population that has grown. We've just hollowed out the center of America. In New York, I think people really don't know how bad it is out in America. And American workers are being replaced by foreign workers, being replaced by illegal immigration in many cases, having the jobs washed out and outsourced. I mean, as soon as Bannon is gone and banished from the kingdom, suddenly he's willing to grant amnesty, which was kind of the signature issue of his campaign.
Okay, here's Ann Coulter the day after the election on the Mark Simone.
Well, Ann Coulter, of course, the best-selling author and columnist. You should go to AnnCoulter.com. You can get her books and her column and a lot of great stuff up there. AnnCoulter.com. And, of course, follow her on Twitter. Ann Coulter, how you doing?
I'm the happiest person in America. I mean, I think you at least expected that every single poll was wrong. Oh, my gosh, are the pollsters humiliated? Whatever happens now, and Trump is in a good position, whatever happens now, all these pollsters, and you probably read the same things I did, Nate Silver, 538, no, this is why you can believe the polls this year. Yes, we made a mistake 4 years ago. We didn't count enough non-college educated white men or something like that. No, we threw them in. We got up to the numbers of 2016. Every poll consistently for 3 months with Biden up across the country by 10 points in each one of these states, from 3 to 10 points. I've been looking at them. Unbelievable. Completely wrong again.
Yeah, well, that's the good news. But the bad news is we haven't gotten rid of Biden yet. What do you think is going to happen here?
I was just thinking, I think Biden is the happiest person in America, besides me, right now, because he's not going to have to explain to AOC why he's not implementing communism.
Well, but what do you think is going to happen? When are we going to know? Friday?
I hope by Friday. I mean, this does show this isn't a partisan thing. A great idea, which I kind of like, and that's we have the same 24 hours in every state. And that's when you vote in person. By the way, that would hurt Republicans, who are the main, in a normal time, not a COVID and liberals are panicked time, but in a normal time, Republicans, of course, send in the most absentee ballots, because why do you need an absentee ballot? Because you're traveling for some sort of job.
Also military, a lot of military.
Military, okay, other than military, they get to send in their ballots, but other than that, just make everybody go in, vote in person, you get 24 hours, and it's done. Done.
So, you're not making me feel good here. What's going to happen?
Oh, I have no idea.
Is this a coincidence that all the Republican governor states got their ballots counted and the states we're waiting for all seem to have suspicious Democratic governors? Is that a coincidence?
No, it would seem not. There are an awful lot of coincidences, and all the shutdowns in Democrat states, all of the riots, or the really heinous riots in Democrat states and uncontrolled riots in Democrat states. No, Americans, I don't care if you want, socialism at the federal level, please start voting Republican at the local level just for your own peace of mind, your own safety. Not only that, but it does, by and large, it's the big cities, Milwaukee in Wisconsin, Detroit in Michigan, Atlanta area in Georgia, and of course that makes anyone familiar with history a little bit nervous, because what these big city machines have done in the past, it's simply a fact, is they wait to see how many votes they need and then manufacture them. So Trump and the Republicans in these states better have a lot of poll watchers, not poll watchers, but vote counter watchers, better have them there watching everything, because they can just wait to see, well, who's registered and hasn't voted. Let's vote for that person. And this isn't liberals love to scream, oh, it's a fiction and this never happens. No, everyone knows it happens. Democrats have written about it for the 1968 election, when Kennedy quotes, that was 68, right? Kennedy quote beats Nixon in Chicago. No, they just waited for Daley. Sorry, 60. They just waited for Daley to manufacture the votes that were needed. Same thing was done in Texas. And footnote, I know a Democratic operative who used to do this in Chicago.
Yeah. So I don't know. This is very tense. So I think I'm trying to remember my history. In 1968, it was Nixon versus Humphrey. Wasn't that one of those elections where they didn't know the next day? I think they didn't know the next day.
I don't know. It's rather rare, and there's no reason for it to be this way. One other piece of what looks like, we don't fully know yet, fantastic news, is that looks like Republicans will hold the Senate, which I was terrified of, even though I don't like a lot of the senators running this year. Don't care, kept my lips zipped. I love divided government, then they can't oppress us. But it looks like Tillis has won in North Carolina. The blessed, what's his name, John James in Michigan, which is fantastic. Looks like Collins is holding on to a seat. It's preliminary now, though, so don't hold me to these, which means we will have picked up 2 seats. That will be Michigan and, of course, Alabama, which was expected, and have only lost 2 seats. If Republicans walked away from this election not losing any seats in the Senate, oh, please, God, let that be true. I'm not taking the Lord's name in vain. I really mean it.
It looks like Lindsey Graham has won, so that's good news and bad news.
Yes, oh, exactly. That's what I mean. Oh, my gosh, and if you've been watching MSNBC, oh, they were so sure Lindsey Graham was going down. Well, they were so sure this was going to be a huge landslide for Biden.
Yeah. Hey, so what do you think? Hunter Biden must be feeling good today. Like, well, we have a chance. I may be able to get some contracts.
I think a lot of people are nervous today, but it mostly should be the pollsters. They're going to have to learn to code. I'm really stunned.
And why are you so happy? You're laughing. We're all tense. We're all on a window ledge. You're so happy today.
I never expected it to be this good. I mean, I did expect Trump to win Florida. This is basically, it was just all night. It was hurdle after hurdle Trump had to overcome, and we were left with what I always thought were going to be the battleground states, the industrial Midwest. And things look pretty good there, but the media has been humiliated. The pollsters have been humiliated. It's so great that Republicans, and this isn't, I think it's worth pointing out, this doesn't end with Trump. Whether or not he fulfilled them, as you know, I've been encouraging him in increasingly strident terms to keep his promises. The populist Republican Party has triumphed now. Look at these Republicans winning in their Senate races as well. It's not like this is just a vote for Trump and the cult of personality. No, it isn't. As good or bad as Trump is, Republicans often outperforms Trump in the states. So people don't want the riots, and they don't want the identity politics, and they do hate the media and the deep state. I mean, this whole election, I think, is more easily explicable as well, for lack of a better term, a hate election. I, of course, happily voted for Trump because I hate the media, and I think 99% of the Biden vote, who likes Biden? Nobody likes Biden. It was all a hate Trump vote. It's a very weird election.
No, I agree. Hey, even Jill Biden doesn't like Biden, but she voted for him. So,
nor the daughter he introduced yesterday as Beau. Wow.
Hey, I kept saying New York was in play. Biden won New York. But take a look at this. Trump got 42% of the vote in New York. That's pretty amazing. That's a lot for...
That's particularly amazing. And listeners, I want you to remember this nonsense about, Democrats would have won every election if it were...
Okay, let's see what Kevin Michael Grace
or as some would like to say, not president-elect. Let's go to KG, Banana Republican KG. And here's a tweet from Donald J. Trump from 25 minutes ago. Official sources may not have called the race when this was tweeted. Brian Kemp, governor, said Georgia's election result will include legally cast ballots and only legally cast ballots, period. Trump responded, this is good news. It means I won. But however, Twitter wants to make sure we understand. Official sources may not have called the race when this was tweeted. No official sources have called the race. We started hearing on Saturday that Biden was president-elect. Why? Because the Associated Press and NBC News had said that he had over 270 electoral votes. They have no official position. Neither does CNN, neither does the New York Times. But I'm looking around to see all of these Biden supporters, whose tweets have warnings that these claims have not been validated by official sources. And no, I'm not seeing them. Josh Kaplan tweeted from an Associated Press story, Oregon's elections director was abruptly fired in a text message by the Secretary of State after he pointed out serious issues with the state's aging and vulnerable technology for running elections. Barr authorizes Department of Justice to probe substantial allegations of voting irregularities despite little evidence of fraud. See, this story is from the AP, Associated Press. It would be, yes, Julie Pace is Washington bureau chief for the Associated Press. It would be very embarrassing for the Associated Press, given that they were one of 2 of the bodies that anointed Biden as president-elect. Robert Reich tweeted, elections usually end with losing candidates graciously congratulating winners, thereby demonstrating their commitment to the democratic system over the win they fought to achieve. But Trump is incapable of conceding or being gracious, another of his blows to American democracy. Oh, is that what happened in 2016? The Democrats said, hey, Trump, got to hand it to you. We didn't think you had a chance, but you beat us fair and square. No, it was nothing like that. Nothing at all. And of course, how many days did Al Gore get in 2000 to try to overturn the results? In Florida, let's see, J5 Killer tweets, the Biden presidency-elect lasted, 48 hours? Even old sad sack Al Gore did better than that. Real Thomas 777 tweeted, "It's fairly telling that Lindsey Graham, McCain's best friend forever, is in attack mode. It's not like his wing of the GOP has any interest in going too bad for the president. The comedy of a coup that the Dems are attempting is too brazen to let slide." Luke Baramo had tweeted, "The 10 lost."
Okay, here's a supercut from 2016.
Democrats are being sore losers. They refuse to acknowledge they lost the election, so what do? They cry malfeasance, wrongdoing, criminality, fraud.
Democrats, more so than Republicans, seem to have a problem conceding defeat. Either the election system broke down or some mystery votes are hiding somewhere.
You have a whole series of Democrats who just said bluntly, if our candidate doesn't win, they stole the election.
The Dems just want to make
Hello.
America...
Hey, what's up, bro?
Kevin Michael, thanks, you too. Kevin Michael Grace looks like he's at a funeral in the 90s.
He looks great.
When are you going to bring him back on your show? First of all, his skin, he himself had like a healthy glow, but I'm just talking about like the suit and like the background, you know what I mean? It's like he's at some like funeral home in the 90s. But like when are you going to get Kevin back and just like admit that you made a mistake by like you've just replaced Kevin with like other talking heads?
It's all in God's hands, my friend.
All right, because I don't know, man. I think that you should come out. You know, he can live with you in LA. You have a pull-out couch, and I think that there's a lot of great adventures to be had.
Thank you. That's beautiful. And how are you dealing with the election aftermath, Babs?
I'm fine. I'm great. I don't know. I'm kind of excited to see what happens. It's very exciting. Has anyone here gotten those grifting emails from Trump where he's like, "Please give me $5 for the election fund"?
No, I don't. But are you saying that my show sucks without Kevin? I mean, it's okay.
No.
It's not going to hurt my feelings.
No. I don't think your show sucks without Kevin. There are plenty of times when your show was great without Kevin. Like, for instance, back in the days with like, kind of the more Brundley, Duvity days. And there are still occasionally shows like that have that energy. It's not that the show sucks without Kevin per se. It's just that, right now it's basically an aggregation of other people's content, which I don't mind. It's still all relatively good content. I'd say like at least half of the people or news clips that you play are at least somewhat worth listening to, which is pretty good rate. But I do miss the energy and liveliness of the earlier era. But with the way YouTube is today,
I miss it too, bro.
It just might not be in the cards.
It's hard because with YouTube's much greater restrictions now, and also societally, people have to be much more careful. So it's much more difficult for me to get guests and get a panel going. I mean, on election night, I think I had 3 people on the show, so that was fun. That was like the old days. But yeah, I absolutely agree that the 2018 days were much better. No argument from me when we had a big, lively panel.
What do you think happened with Kevin Michael Grace? Do you think that was basically you being like, there can only be one person with a gigantic cock in this room?
No, I think we did something like 420 shows together. I mean, it's not easy to do that. So I think Kevin is better off with his own show, and people who love Kevin, they don't necessarily particularly like me. So I think Kevin's better off with his own show. Now, my own ratings, they plunged, and that's fine. We worked together for a long time. Sorry.
Why did your ratings plunge?
Oh, because when I brought Kevin on, it kind of ended the show that I was doing, because many of the people who are regulars on my show no longer wanted to come on the show. So
because
I essentially,
of Kevin?
For whatever reason, they no longer wanted to come on the show. So I used to have.
I don't think that was necessarily because of Kevin. Was it? I think that it might be more complex
I can't
than
read
that.
people.
I think it might have more to do with the reading people is difficult, but I think it might have more, in fact, to do with the manner in which Kevin was implemented in the show rather than Kevin himself. Even Kevin as a co-host is good, but it would just there would just be these moments, and like I love Kevin, I love your show, but there were these moments of where Kevin would just be like going on and on and on, and sometimes people just want to see like some fucking fast-paced like ADHD autism.
Yeah, the show stopped working, and I'm not saying Kevin's fault. Not Kevin's fault. My show stopped working, and the show was at its best when we had a lively panel with unexpected people saying unexpected things.
Kevin versus Kyle, that was golden. That was quality content. You know, Brundle and Kevin versus you and Kyle.
Yes. Yeah,
it was beautiful.
That was good. So I miss the days of having those lively panel discussions.
How did you ever at any point were you under the impression that that the show would become something bigger than it is? Like, how does it feel psychologically speaking to, you know, you have this thing, it's building momentum, it's building momentum, it's building momentum. You might even be able to make a career off it, at least at the rate it's going at one point. And then suddenly, you know, things stall out and you're back to square one, you know, especially if you invested any time and energy in it. Doesn't that feel kind of daunting?
Yes. So I definitely did. In the spring of 2018, I thought the show was building and I thought it had unlimited potential. But then so in the spring of 2018, I'd go live and there'd always be 100 viewers. And then Kevin came on and the show stopped growing. But we'd still sustain around, 100 viewers. Occasionally we'd get more than that, but the show stayed stable basically during the time that Kevin was on. But yes, in the spring of 2018, I had dreams that the show would build, and the show never built. In fact, it just stopped working. And then after I parted ways with Kevin, the viewership just plunged into the toilet.
Well, I think part of this is just because, you know, you're not devoted enough to the grift. As you say, you know, this is a show that you do primarily for your own amusement and entertainment, even though I think you get like some jollies from like the glory of the grift. And like, you know, it always feels good to get a donation and lots of viewers, but ultimately, as you said, you know, you wanted to do your own thing. So in my perception, it seems as if, correct me if I'm wrong, you were kind of unwilling to forego that uncomfortable state of feeling as if the show isn't really your own. And instead you were like, oh, I want to do what I want to do. And because of that, your viewership took a hit. And I think there are several instances in which that happened. So like, have you ever thought many times, like, maybe I should just devote myself to the grift and just like, you know, debase myself and make myself uncomfortable in order to, you know, get more viewers and more donations?
No, I've never thought about devoting myself to the grift. I have thought about, okay, what are some bad decisions that I made with the show? So I think the worst decision was shifting the show from a open discussion show to a structured reading the news show. I think that killed the show. And Kevin has a huge audience, and I'm glad to see him thriving, but the show was killed by that switch, and I have not been able to get it back. And so I do think about how I could get it back. Like, I would love to be doing shows with Casey. Like, I had a special rapport with Casey. I had a special rapport back in the day with Dennis Dale. I had a special rapport back in the day with Vivian Veritas. I got along well with Mike Enoch. There are a lot of people that I got along well with, and maybe it says something about my character. I lost Casey. Like, he was weekly regular on the show, and sometimes more. He'd come on the show several times a week. Maybe there's a flaw in my character that I lost Casey, I lost Dennis Dale, I lost Vivian Veritas, I lost Monsieur, you know, I lost a whole slew of people, Kyle. I lost a whole slew of people who are making valuable contributions to the show.
Well, I think for some of those people, it's like, don't take it too personally, right? Because momentum builds momentum. It's the snowball effect. It's like, you know, I think that Monsieur would be here if there was, you know, like lively conversation with a big audience, but as well as in a free-form style. But, you know, then of course there are instances of people like, you know, like Kyle or even Enoch. Like, why do you think Kyle doesn't really come up on the show as much anymore?
I think he's found better ways of spending his time. I think that's true for everyone. I mean, I think for Dennis Dale, it was ideological. I think Dennis and Casey felt betrayed when I embraced the Kaufness critique. I think they felt betrayed, which is pretty funny.
Man, because, okay, here's why. It's because, right, so, like, I mean, like, it is funny. It is funny when you frame it like that, right? But at the same time, you know, you're pushing, you know, how do you feel about the gaslighting accusation, right? Like, you're pushing these views that or not pushing them, but you're creating a space wherein they can be discussed. But then at the same time, when someone for discussing the very same things that you discuss in your space, gets themselves destroyed or blown up, in many instances, through no malicious intent of their own. I just wonder how you feel about these things. I feel like, I'm not saying that you left Monique out to dry, but it did very much like
I felt terrible. I felt terrible, and so I keep telling Monique it's not my fault, and he never tells me it's my fault. But I feel terrible about what happened to Monique. Horrible, and my rational brain says you're not responsible, but emotionally I feel horrible about it. And so I really miss Monique on the show, and I miss Dennis Dale on the show, and I miss Ricardo on the show. I miss Kyle on the show. I miss the good old days. I miss when we had the band together and we were,
of course,
well,
it's you never know what the future holds, right? So just don't despair yet. But here's the thing, right? How do you feel? Do you feel as if, to an extent, first of all, I question the extent to which you are even an ideological actor, but to the extent you are, how would you say that you've in any way changed the positions that you hold in any time within the past 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, I change all the time. I mean, I just did a 180 on voter fraud just over the weekend. I used to agree with the Republican talking point that voting fraud was rampant and that it was mainly being carried out by Democrats. I read a couple of books on the topic over the weekend. I've done a complete 180. Now I'm highly skeptical of those claims in the past. Now this 2020 election seems weird, so I'm open to new evidence. But now I see that I've been taken for a ride by all these Republican pundits.
I mean, it sounds like you've just leapt. It sounds like you've just flip-flopped, leapt from one narrative to another, much akin to the person who flips from communism to fascism. It just seems kind of I don't know. What do you think of? What do you think of that? I'm not sure. Do you think that you're doing due diligence here, or are you just jumping from one narrative to another? Because I struggle sometimes with jumping from one simplistic narrative to another. I used to be Marxist, then I was sort of a monarchist reactionary, and now I'm whatever I am right now.
Well, I think I've been open and honest. I said I read 2 books, I listened to some podcasts, I read some academic papers, I put in, 20 hours of research, and now I've changed my opinion on a particular topic. So I think I do this all the time. I read the Kaufman's critique, and I say, okay, this seems convincing to me. Until there are holes punched in the Kaufman's critique, I believe that he is more accurate than Kevin McDonald.
Yeah,
so
but
this
I
is
don't think that
let me finish my point. So this is 2.5 years now since the Kaufman's critique, and I haven't seen any holes punched in it. So as long as I'm being honest with people about this is what I've read and this is where I've changed. So I never proclaim that I'm an expert on voter fraud. I tell you, I've put in 20 hours. I've read 2 books. Pass.
I don't know. I mean, I agree, but at the same time, I'm not sure whether I should think more about you and insofar as the power and platform you have, or think more about the people who listen to you and listen to your show and take it seriously. Because I really wonder, I think that the only position, let's say, for instance, on the issue of voter fraud, or even the Kaufman's Kevin McDonald issue, I think that the only perspective one can take is, you look at the facts, gather out what are, basically pretty sturdy facts, and then everything besides that, you can't really know one way or the other, and, you can have a narrative that you prefer, but, really being agnostic about things like that, I feel like is the only intellectually honest way to go ahead.
Right, but life doesn't really allow that. So I think it's even more honest to say, based on the information that I have, I now understand things this way. And then if you change your mind, then you come along a month later or a year later, say, okay, based on this book I've read, or this podcast I've listened to, or this documentary I've watched, I have now modified my position in this direction. So you are relaying the information. Life forces you to constantly make decisions and to take stands. Particularly when you're doing a show like this. that you have to take a position, or at least tell people where you're coming from. And so I think I pretty frequently change my mind. As I learn things, I adjust. And I couldn't imagine doing things in a less honest fashion. I'm not going to just throw up my hands and say I'm agnostic about everything, when in some areas there does seem to be clarity.
I mean, I'm not sure if, like, you know, I spent 20 hours reading means clarity, though. You know.
Does it mean nothing? Does 20 hours reading on a topic, does it mean nothing? All right? Or does it mean that based on this 20 hours, I'm sorry?
It could mean nothing. Depends.
Of course, it could mean nothing. It could mean, of course, that's not the question. The question is, if you do 20 hours of serious study on a topic, is it inevitable that you come away with nothing? Or is it possible that you come away with some form of clarity? I think it's obvious that it is possible that you come away from a topic with some form of clarity, particularly when you're talking about a topic like voter fraud compared to the other pundits who haven't even done that 20 hours. Mark Levine and a Dennis Prager, they obviously didn't even do the tiny bit of work that I did. And so it's really easy to see through their sophistry.
Okay, I completely agree with you there, right? Like I'm 100% on the same page with that. Most people do not do the necessary work. So yes, you're right. I don't know. Hold on. There's someone I was going to ask about, a former guest of yours on your show.
Here, think about it, and I'll list my favorites. So I think I had the most fun hosting shows with Vivian, and with Casey, and with Ricardo. I think those are my three favorite who I really jived with. I really enjoyed Kyle as well, and those are some of the favorite people I've done shows with. Now, what were you going to say?
Well, this is mostly unrelated, but you know, a sphere that I think, you know, if you want to be on the forefront of like vanguard, you know, political activity, if you want to be where the smart people are, what I recommend is checking out some of the following spheres. I think you should check out, you know, the people surrounding the spheres of the podcast, What's Left, as well as Red Scare, and I think that you should just look at the whole general, I guess, for lack of a better term, kind of a post-left, or shall we say non-right-wing anti-liberal sphere, because I actually think that there might be more action going on there within the next few, you know, half year or so. I think that might be the next online movement for you to track. So just personal tip to you, I think that you should keep your eyes on it. However, it may be more kind of like full of like, you know, like idiots who have their, you know, brains buried so far in academia that they can't actually bring anything into real life. But you know, it's an interesting sphere, and I recommend you watch it. Keep eyes on.
Thanks. And chat says what we all want is more of this. Luke interviewing people and people interviewing Luke. Yeah, like someone like Kevin, he can do a show and come up with like 15 unique things to say per show. Like Kevin is a content manufacturer.
He's a machine.
Yeah, he's a content machine. I am someone who needs to be bouncing off people. Like I need to be interviewing people, talking to people, hosting people. I can't come up with as much original content. Like, you know, I can only come up with like 5% of the original content and perspectives and views and opinions that Kevin Michael Grace. He is a content machine. I am someone who needs to be talking to people.
I see. Yeah, no, that's interesting, and I you know, go on doing what you do. Josh Randall in the chat says, yearning for the glory days dressed up as constructive criticism. Yes, that is true. I am yearning for the glory days, but at the same time, I think that, you know, glory days are not just simply insofar as the Luke Ford show serves the pragmatic purpose of an ideological space where, you know, people from across the aisle can meet and have discussions, whether those discussions are primarily like for the purpose of, you know, entertainment or you know, whether they're productive conversations. I think regardless, you know, this is a good space, and I look forward to see what you do with it in the future. You know, just because it's at a low point now doesn't mean things can't change. And also, final question before I leave: when are you bringing back Rabbi Rabs?
No plans. Yeah, no plan. So there are two types of hosts. There are people who can set the temperature level, essentially set the thermostat. Someone like Kevin Michael Grace, he can set the temperature of a show. He's got that kind of power. And then there are people like me, who's more someone who can read the thermostat, who can read the crowd, who can bring people on, who can coordinate a discussion. And two very distinct types. The Kevin Michael Grace type is much more rare. Someone who can come up with as many ideas as he does and generate as much content as he does, and someone who can create the temperature of a room like he does. You know, it's only like 1 day in 20 that I can do the things that Kevin Michael Grace does pretty much every day. So let's go to Tucker Carlson.
Good evening. Welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Thank you for watching. We appreciate it. In case you haven't noticed, it's hard to trust anything you hear right now. We've heard you. We're grateful that you trust us, and we will try to be worthy of your trust. We want to begin tonight by assessing some of the things no doubt you have heard about last week's presidential election. There are conflicting versions of virtually every part of that story. But as of right now, here's what we think we know. For much of election night, Donald Trump seemed to be leading in a number of key swing states. Then early Wednesday morning, he began to fall behind. That trend continued more or less for several days. On Saturday, the media declared Joe Biden the president-elect. Biden quickly accepted that judgment. The Biden campaign now has something called the Office of the President-elect. It sounds official, which of course is the point of setting it up. And in the end, it's possible it will be official. If, after all the questions have been answered, it becomes clear that Joe Biden is the legitimate winner of the presidential election, we will accept that, and we'll encourage others to accept it too. We're Americans first. We want what is best for this country. We want our system of government to continue. Whether it does continue, though, depends in part on how we proceed from here. As of tonight, tens of millions of Americans suspect that this election was stolen from them. That means we now live in a country where a large percentage of our population no longer believes that our democracy is real. That is sad. It is also dangerous. It could easily get worse. What we're doing in response is hardly the solution. It is making our country much more volatile. It is setting us up for something bad. In a democracy, you cannot ignore honest questions from citizens. You're not allowed. You can't dismiss them out of hand as crazy or immoral for asking. You can't just cut away from coverage you don't like. You can't simply tell people to accept an outcome, because force doesn't work in a democracy. That's dictatorship. In a free society, you have to convince the public of your legitimacy. You have to win them over with reason. Democracy is always a voluntary arrangement. Telling voters to shut up is never enough. So in this case, tonight, there's only one way to lower the national temperature and unite the country. We need to find out exactly what happened in this election. And there are questions, and that means we have to answer them. For example, in Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Michigan, the Trump campaign has now collected signed affidavits that attest to criminal activity during the voting process. In the city of Detroit, witnesses have alleged under oath that ballots were improperly backdated and counted without matching signatures. One poll watcher alleges that 40,000 late unsealed absentee ballots were counted orally, and all of them went for Democrats. In the state of Nevada, 8 whistleblowers from within the Nevada election department say they witnessed voter fraud abetted by other election officials and by their supervisors. According to one affidavit, a poll worker saw people bringing handfuls of ballots to a Biden-Harris campaign van. Those ballots were then filled out at the van, placed in return envelopes. Eventually, Biden supporters formed a wall to block outsiders from seeing what they were doing. Meanwhile, according to voting records, people who were not even alive still somehow managed to vote on Tuesday. In New York, deceased voters cast absentee ballots. On October 9th in Nevada, a man called Fred Stokes Jr. mailed in his vote. The only problem was Fred Stokes Jr. died 3 years ago at the age of 92. The Republican Party of Nevada says it is aware of hundreds of other potential cases of dead people casting ballots. In Pennsylvania, records show turnout from several people who were born in the 19th century. They apparently rose from their graves to vote. Now, all of that is real. We spent all weekend checking it. False claims of fraud can be every bit as destructive as the fraud itself, so we need to be careful and responsible, all of us. But what we just told you is true, and there's more of it. Just hours ago in the state of Georgia, an election official admitted they will find illegal votes and double voters when they check the voter rolls.
Let me be perfectly clear on another point. We are going to find that people did illegally vote. That's going to happen. There are going to be double voters. There are going to be people who did not have the qualifications of a registered voter to vote in the state. That will be found. Is it 10,353? Unlikely. But every election, as I've said, I think every day at this podium, is imperfect.
We are going to find that people did illegally vote. That's going to happen. That is the official account before even counting the votes from a key swing state in the middle of a contested election. And of course, you can believe it because we've already found illegal voting. So much for those claims that voter fraud never happens. Of course it happens. They knew it happened when they told us it would never happen because they're liars. So we know that for sure. At this stage, the fraud that we can confirm does not seem to be enough to alter the election results. We should be honest and tell you that. Of course, that could change. But changing the election results is not the whole point. The real point is that fraud took place, and that should horrify us. If you want people to believe that our system is real, that our system is worth, say, joining the military and dying to protect, then you've got to get to the bottom of what just happened, and you've got to do it as quickly and responsibly as you can. You can't have fraud in an election because no one will believe in elections, and then things fall apart. But gathering facts is the last thing our media, our designated facts gatherers, seem to want to do. Instead, they're demanding that you shut up and accept Joe Biden. Period. That's their verdict. You must accept it. And if you don't accept it, they'll hurt you. In other words, no one in this country is going to set up a, quote, resistance to Joe Biden. They're going to make certain of that. Those resist stickers you remember? No, those are for Range Rovers only. No pickup trucks allowed. Try it, buddy, and you'll find out. Overstatement? Well, this morning, a prominent anchor on CNN sent this tweet to Trump supporters. Quote, I truly sympathize with those dealing with losing. But at a certain point, one has to think not only about what's best for the nation, peaceful transfer of power, but how any future employers might see your character defined during adversity. Got that? Your character is on trial here. Future employers, take note. In other words, accept Joe Biden now or you'll never work again. Do what CNN tells you to do or good luck feeding your family. Did the Sicilian Mafia ever make threats that explicit? No, they didn't because they knew the FBI was listening. But in this case, the FBI is on board. And so, of course, is the entire media establishment. After Joe Biden claimed victory on Saturday, CNN released an ad commanding its viewers to accept Joe Biden as their lawful president and holy savior. If you don't let Joe Biden into your heart, there cannot be peace. Watch.
Our trust has been broken in our leaders, in our institutions, even with some of our friends. And we are hurting. Now more than ever, we need each other to listen, to learn from one another, to rebuild those bonds.
It's over. Now's the time to come together. Now's the time for healing, or else. So what exactly is this healing that they're looking forward to, that they're commanding you to participate in? Well, Michelle Obama's thought a lot about healing. In her message of unity, Michelle Obama wrote this, quote, let's remember that tens of millions of people voted for the status quo, even when it meant supporting lies, hate, chaos, and division, end quote. That's the unity message. Let's remember who disobeyed. Let's hurt them. Let's remember the people who voted for our political opponents. Sandy Cortez of Westchester didn't need to be reminded because she hadn't forgotten. Cortez asked this, quote, is anyone archiving these Trump sycophants for when they try to downplay or deny their complicity in the future? In the future? Is George Orwell writing her scripts? No, she's writing them herself. And the answer, of course, to that question, the question, is anyone keeping track of the Trump supporters who must be punished into perpetuity? The answer is yes, someone is keeping track. In fact, many people. Harry Savugian, the former national press secretary for the Democratic National Committee and former Pete Buttigieg staffer, was already hard at work on an online enemies list. He wrote this, quote, White House staff are starting to look for jobs. Employers considering them should know there are consequences for hiring anyone who helps Trump attack American values, end quote. Oh, American values, says the guy who's going full Soviet. Totally impervious to irony, these people. Corporate America, of course, was on board. Needless to say, they never left. They were always on the team. The Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, Republican groups, right, along with CEOs from companies like United Airlines, Microsoft, Amazon, you name them. They already congratulated Joe Biden as the counting was still underway. And as they were doing that, the media were not hard at work verifying the integrity of the election, of the democracy they so deeply cherish. They weren't interviewing the poll workers who signed those affidavits we just told you about, which are real. Instead, here's what they're doing.
How you feeling? I almost can't talk right now because of the emotion. Everyone is welcome under this tent. We don't care who you are. We don't care if you voted for us or not. You're all part of this American experiment. I was so overwhelmed to hear that. I don't care what people think, if they think I'm biased or not. I don't care. And so I'm very emotional. So when you ask me how I'm feeling right now, I'm sorry. That's all I can tell you. This is how I feel right now. I'm so happy to have this platform to be able to do this. I may not have it after this, but I really don't care. I am so happy.
I don't care. Take it from someone who does this gig for a living. If you can't keep your emotions in check to think clearly, you are a child, go do something else. I don't care if people think I'm biased or not. There you go. And they really don't care because they don't need to, because they won or claim they do. Like all hasty decisions, the one they're trying to force on us, we will regret it. Have you ever made a hasty decision you can live with long term? No. No, you haven't. The point isn't that we need to keep investigating until Donald Trump wins. That is not the point. The point is we need to find out what happened so that the rest of us believe the system is real. And to make that happen, Congress ought to investigate every meaningful claim of illegal voting. Every legitimate claim that is raised must be investigated. Would that become a circus? Of course. Would congressional hearing on voter fraud descend inevitably into partisan posturing? What do you think? Yeah, it's guaranteed. But there's no choice. It's still worth it. An investigation like that, a federal investigation, would produce facts. And we need facts. Transparency is the key. Without it, there's no hope. Ever wonder why people on both sides are embracing conspiracy theories? Why do you think that's happening? And you can't just make them go away or shut down the websites. People reach for that. Why? Because they know the people telling the official story are lying, and they are lying. And the moment they try to get real answers from the people in charge, here's what happens.
All of you, suck it up. Suck it up like we sucked it up. And if you are not sure that you're comfortable with Joe Biden, do what we did. Find things and then take it to the law. And if the law says it's something to look at it. But from now on, suck it up. Grow the pair for him that he can't grow for himself. Because this is ridiculous. You're not sure that he won. You're bringing into question all these Americans who voted legally, came out and stood and voted. How dare you question it?
The unhappiest people in the world have all the power. And how dare you question it? How dare you ask why dead people are voting? How dare you question the decision desk, plebe? Who are you? Their contempt, evident all along, is completely out in the open right now. If you won't admit that Joe Biden is the president, even though votes are still being counted, guess what you are? And you saw this coming, ladies and gentlemen. You're a racist.
More white people voted for Donald Trump in 2020 than they did in 2016. So the reckoning that we're experiencing as a nation, at least to my mind, shows us that race, selfishness, greed continue to threaten the very life of our republic.
Oh, of course. Racism, says the Princeton professor. Of course. Not a surprise. That's always the answer when they want to force you to be quiet. The question is there a shelf life on this? How long do the people in charge think they can continue making the same play again and again and again? How long can the most privileged people in our society, the Princeton professor, berate those beneath them into silence from their perches on cable news? They probably imagine they can do it forever, but they're wrong. It can't last. Nothing this grotesque goes on forever. At some point, it will end. We hope the system won't explode at that point, but that's where we're going. So what's the solution? How do we fix it? How do we bring the country together? How do we calm things down? How do we make an America you want to live in? And the only answer, the only solution is honesty. Let's all stop lying. Lying about everything that matters, every day of our lives. That's what we're doing now. Have you noticed? How many times did you lie today because you had to? Let's repeal our national dishonesty mandate. It's a law never codified, but still ruthlessly enforced. And tell the truth instead. That's our only hope. Tell the truth about everything. Declassify the documents. Note the obvious right in front of you. Get to the bottom of it all. Why shouldn't we do that? What we're doing now clearly isn't working. Enforced lying is making everyone paranoid and crazy. Truth cannot be worse than what we're living through now. One of the first things that we should be honest about is that the worst forms of election tampering took place far from polling sites. It wasn't votes from dead people. Those are bad. But they weren't the worst thing. The worst thing was more obvious than that. The worst thing was Silicon Valley. The tech monopoly spent the final weeks of the presidential election suppressing the voices of Trump supporters.
Okay, let's see who's in the hangout. Rodney Martin, go ahead. Rodney?
Just real briefly, Luke, can you hear me all right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Remember, we talked about this concept of state legislatures getting involved in this process?
Yes.
And of course, earlier, the Justice Department now. If I can just take just a minute and read you a letter that was just delivered to the Secretary of State Elections Division from the President of the Arizona Senate. Dear Secretary Hobbs, the election cycle is one of the most contentious in history of Arizona and the nation. Election campaigns at all levels have engaged, endured tremendous conflict. I'm trying to read it through a phone. And controversy. Under the circumstances, it is not surprising that the serious allegations of fraud and corruption in the election process have been raised by various parties. It appears that these allegations will linger indefinitely and may cause substantial damage to the credibility of our democratic process if something isn't done to alleviate claims that the election was conducted unfairly, if not fraudulently. To properly analyze the many claims that have been made, I believe it is imperative that you, as the chief election officer of the state, make available all data and logic and accuracy tests to independent experts evaluating for evaluation. Assuming the allegations of fraud are without merit, an independent analysis would help restore credibility and hopefully end the current controversy over the fairness of the election process in Arizona. To be clear, I am not claiming that fraud was involved in Arizona's election, but many others are making that claim. I believe it is imperative that we do everything we can to satisfy Arizonans and that their votes were lawfully counted in that election and that the election was completely legitimate. This is tracking very similar to what the Florida legislature did during the Bush versus Gore controversy before the Supreme Court ultimately made their action moot. Now we're seeing finally the first state legislative officer. Of course, this is significant. The president of the Senate can convene the Senate at any time for picking electors. Either this is laying the foundation or it's a shot across the bow. But it's significant that this has come out on the very night that the Justice Department has announced that they are going to review the matter.
Okay, thanks, Rodney. Appreciate it. So Mark Collette has been banned from Twitter. CBS has ordered all reality shows to be at least 50% of people of color. I don't know if you've watched any CBS shows, but I'm struck by how CBS shows seem to be about 30% black and at least 50% of color. Talking about the dramatic shows now, the reality shows have to be at least 50% people of color. So CBS seems to be doing more to put people of color on their TV shows.
And hiding damaging information about his opponent, Joe Biden. That happened. We saw it firsthand. We experienced it. You may have too. In August, Facebook banned the pro-Trump Super PAC Committee to Defend the President from buying any campaign advertising. What? What election has that happened in? None. Just a few weeks ago, as you well know, the New York Post published true and accurate details of the Biden family's lucrative overseas influence peddling operation, which was real, which Joe Biden knew about. Facebook, in turn, limited the distribution of this article, and Twitter blocked people from posting. In other words, they censored it. They kept people from knowing about it. And on what basis? Nothing in those articles was untrue, but they censored it anyway, along with any content that was critical of lockdowns and mandatory mask wearing. Why? Because Biden supported those. There are many threads to this. There's overwhelming evidence it happens. We'll just pick one piece. A report from Breitbart. They took a lot of time to look into what Google was doing to them. They found that Google suppressed its stories about Joe Biden in the middle of 2020 through Election Day. Suppressed them. Quote, clicks and impressions to Breitbart News from Joe Biden Google searches displayed a healthy pattern of activity until the middle of 2020 when they suddenly flatlined. The plunge first occurred after a major update to Google's search algorithm in May 2020. Ask anybody in digital news. Do searches for the names of candidates decline as we get closer to the election? No, probably not. In fact, they accelerate. But not if Google is censoring you, which is what they were doing. None of this is normal. It doesn't matter how often or how emphatically CNN encourages it, tells you it's fine, tells you it's necessary to suppress disinformation. It's totally wrong and it's crazy. Democracy cannot survive tampering like that. The Biden campaign knows exactly what happened. They know exactly the degree to which they benefited from it. And that's why they're rewarding their co-conspirators in big tech with even more power. Biden apparently has already hired Jessica Hertz, that's Facebook's former associate general counsel, as well as Cynthia Hogan, the former Apple vice president for government affairs. Oh, kind of an inside game? Yeah. Reportedly, Biden has also considered naming Eric Schmidt, the former top executive at Google and a big Biden donor, to his technology industry task force in the White House. This is not a matter of rewarding your supporters. It's much bigger than that, and it's of deep concern to every American. If we're going to have free and fair elections going forward, and we must, then we have to end Silicon Valley's total control over information. It's the first thing we must do. We can't have free and fair elections without doing that. If voters aren't allowed to learn critical facts about political candidates before they vote, you can't have a democracy. And of course, that's why they're doing it. And then at some point, we need to understand what happened to the polls. The polls this year were profoundly wrong. They're pretending otherwise now. They were fine. They weren't fine. They're lying to you when they tell you they were fine. They were measurably not fine. We could go on for an hour. Let's sum it up for you. Pollsters told us Republicans would lose seats in the House last week. They gained seats in the House. They told us Joe Biden would crush Donald Trump in the general election. He didn't. We're not alleging some formal conspiracy between pollsters, by the way, just so you know. We don't think they all went out to dinner together and rigged it. We assume that many pollsters made honest mistakes. Some of them are good people. On the other hand, and this is irrefutably true, nearly all of their mistakes helped Joe Biden. The final Real Clear Politics polling average had Joe Biden up 7.2% in the national popular vote. The final Quinnipiac poll said he was up 11%. Biden's current lead comes in at just over 3%. Those are big errors. Quinnipiac's polls weren't just wrong nationally. They were wrong all over the country. And bad polling has an effect, a big effect, at many levels. Here are a couple. In South Carolina, for example, Quinnipiac released 3 separate polls that showed Lindsey Graham was tied with the Democrat challenging him, a man called Jamie Harrison. On the basis of that, Harrison was able to raise over $100 million. That's the most ever for a Senate candidate. So Jamie Harrison or any of these other candidates went to donors in Los Angeles, New York, the money centers for the Democratic Party, and said, look at these polls. We've got a shot. Boom, $100 million. $67 million for the Democrat who lost in the state of Maine. In South Carolina, Jamie Harrison lost the race by 10 points. It wasn't close. In Ohio, Quinnipiac's final poll showed Joe Biden up by 4. Trump inverted it and won by a little over 4%. So none of these errors were limited to one polling outfit. Most of the polls were way off. Why does that matter? It's not just annoying. It's significant. Research shows that polls influence voting behavior. So effectively, all those errors amounted to voter suppression. And it's really clear why. When people believe that their candidate can't win, and that's what the polls told us, can't win, they're less likely to vote for that candidate and much less likely to send money. Would you want to be the guy sending money to a losing candidate? No, you wouldn't. And no one else would either. A study by researchers at McGill University and the University of Toronto found this, quote, polls may lead people not to vote for a given party because that party is perceived to be unlikely to win. Yeah, didn't need researchers to tell us that. That's obvious. Maybe that's why they did it. We don't know. We should find out. And finally, another massive source of election interference that we should get to the bottom of came from our public health authorities and the politicians who run some of our biggest cities. This unfolded over months. We chronicled it in detail on this show. We'll continue to. But the bottom line is they leveraged the coronavirus pandemic to move votes. They certainly leveraged the pandemic to change the way we vote in ways they knew would benefit them. They're almost willing to admit that now. In New York, the governor there, Andrew Cuomo, announced that politicians would be, quote, taking a new tone on coronavirus now that Joe Biden is the president-elect. In other words, the great orange emergency has passed now, and it's party time. Watch thousands of Joe Biden supporters, including Chuck Schumer himself, gather side by side, literally sharing wine bottles in the streets. Suddenly, the deadly epidemic scares them not at all.
Now we take Georgia, and then we change the world. Yeah! I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Mr. Schumer? Now we take Georgia, and then we change America.
Yeah, and then we change America. We could go on tonight about what happened in last week's election, and in future shows, you know that we will. But for now, let's sum it up. Here's the point. We don't know how many votes were stolen on Tuesday night. We don't know anything about the software that many say was rigged. We don't know. We got to find out. But here's what we do know. On a larger level, at the highest levels, actually, our system isn't what we thought it was. It's not as fair as it should be. Not even close. Sorry, hate to say that. It's the milk bottles at the fair. They knew you were coming. They laughed at you when you left. We wish that wasn't true, but it is true. And you are not crazy for knowing it. You're right. After the break, Victor Davis Hanson joins us on what exactly is going on in our country and in the States. Our reporting straight ahead.
Okay, did you notice how Tucker was very grateful to retain an audience, and he understands the widespread anger at Fox News, and he understands the growing resentment against Fox, and there's a lot built into that monologue, and much of it was about preserving a place for Fox News in your viewing habits. All right, check out this.
To acknowledge they lost the election. Democrats are being sore losers. They refuse to acknowledge they lost the election. So what do? They cry malfeasance, wrongdoing, criminality, fraud.
Democrats, more so than Republicans, seem to have a problem conceding defeat. Either the election system broke down or some mystery votes are hiding somewhere.
You have a whole series of Democrats who've just said bluntly, if our candidate doesn't win, they stole the election.
The Dems just want to make America suffer. It's like losing the World Series and demanding an extra inning a day later.
The Democrats are refusing to accept the declared results of the national media. So how do they do this? Lo and behold, they find missing ballots.
The radical left is attacking the sanctity of our votes,
refusing to accept the midterm election results. So what if these were Republicans refusing to concede?
Democrats may see how they'll be able in the future to steal elections through lawsuits that they can't win with the voters.
Ramping up election conspiracy theories, accusing Republicans of outright stealing the election. Kind of rich. You know what? Sounds sore loserish.
Tucker, that Detroit lawsuit contains several sworn affidavits from a few people that were inside the massive absentee ballot counting process in Detroit. They claim fraud. One of those affidavits comes from a Detroit employee who claims she saw so much illegal activity she had to speak out. A portion of that woman's affidavit reads in part, quote, I was instructed not to look at any of the signatures on the absentee ballots, and I was instructed not to compare the signature on the absentee ballot with the signature on file. I was told to alter the information in the QVF, which is software, to falsely show that the absentee ballots had been received in time to be valid. I estimate this was done to thousands of ballots. Another sworn affidavit from a Republican voting challenger who was also a former assistant attorney general in Michigan. He claims that he observed election workers adjust names and numbers on ballots. Michigan Secretary of State tells us these claims are meritless. And a lead attorney for Detroit writes, quote, this case is not based upon actual evidence of any election fraud or misconduct. It is based upon various conspiracy theories. This lawsuit is requesting all evidence, including computers and documents, to be preserved and for Detroit to stop certifying its vote. Tucker.
Matt Finn for us live tonight. Thanks so much, Matt. Victor Davis Hanson is one of the wisest people we ever speak to. He's a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks so much for coming on. Where do you think we are right now? What's happening?
Well, I think you outlined sort of a tragic last Orwellian convergence of big data, big tech, big pollster, big money, administrative state. And what they did, Tucker, is they rendered the most hallowed date in American traditions, the first Tuesday in November, into an abstraction. It's a construct. Even the word absentee ballot doesn't mean anything anymore. It ceased to exist. And what did they replace it with? This new concept of early voting and mail-in balloting. We never heard those words before. And what they mean is 30, 40, 45 days before the election, you can keep voting casually. You go in, vote. Maybe not any day. There's no one day you vote. Ballots can come in 1, 2, 3, 4 days after the polls. Maybe if the rules are too oppressive, you can sue and overturn the constitutional right of the legislators to set the voting laws. And what did we miss? It used to be the last 2 or 3 weeks were the heated time of the campaign. That's when you showed the mettle of the candidate. So what did it matter if Donald Trump had a really good second debate? What did it matter if we heard about Hunter Biden when millions of people had already voted? And what did they vote on? What were the perceptions? They were, as you said, they were massaged by polls. So they were their knowledge came, well, you know what, Wisconsin's 17 down and 12 down in the national polls, and Trump's favorability is 18 down, so it really wouldn't be wise to give money or to vote. It's over with. Exactly. And so we really abrogated, took away that responsibility of the citizen, and we outsourced it. And that wasn't enough because we took the personal element out of it. You used to go to the polls and somebody would say, Mrs. Smith, Mr. Jones, you didn't sign. Your date, got a date, remember that, here's your address. And we just turned it over to this pseudo-scientific group of people that said, we have computers, we're exact. We can poll to the exact decimal point. And we dumped all of these votes into these anonymous sinners where there was no human contact, no transparency, no audit, and we expect them not to have 15% of the vote under the old absentee system, but 70, 80, 85% of the vote. And we expect them to get a result that's going to be accurate, audited, adjudicated. It can't happen. And then to add insult to injury on election night, we have these same pseudo-scientific experts say, you know what, 2%, 10%, this state is over with, and this state over here is not over with. And they have nothing to do with reality, but they form a narrative, a theme. So in the case of last Tuesday night, why would you, if you were a Trump supporter, why would you object to what you thought was going on in Michigan and Pennsylvania when you were told that Barry Goldwater State, the bastion of conservatism, was lost 20 minutes after the polls closed? Or that Texas and Florida can't even be called because Trump has been wiped out in his home base. That shapes perceptions even after the polls close. So the only mystery is what's behind all this. And I think it's a transition from a rugged individual who has to take a responsibility to know the issue, show up on election day, and because he's working or she's sick, and then turning it into sort of an entitlement. You just lay back, and whenever you contact a government agent, they're going to send you a registration form, and somebody's even going to harvest that and knock on the door and fill it out, and the polls are going to tell you who you should vote for because they're scientific, and they have the authority of Twitter or Facebook or social media that you use. And then to add final insult, with all that, and then you're going to be told you're going to be a winner or a loser based on these perceived polls on election night and the analytics. And so to finish, Tucker, what we did was we took the prime element of citizenship, which is voting on election day that has to be approved and have some authority and sanctity, and we destroyed it. And without voting, you don't have citizenship. Without citizenship, you don't have a republic. So that's what's at stake. And when people like Gavin Newsom and Hillary Clinton say that this COVID virus and lockdown was an opportunity to transform things and a crisis never to go to waste, then we think maybe it wasn't accidental. Maybe it wasn't accidental. Maybe it wasn't just the way things had to be. And that's really scary.
It is scary. I don't want to reach that conclusion, but you can see how people would. Victor Davis Hanson, it's great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
We told you a minute ago that the core problem in this country is that everybody is forced to lie about everything all the time. That won't change until normal people with no power stand up and refuse to lie. After the break, you're going to meet someone who has no power, who has stood up and said, I'm not going to lie anymore. It's an amazing story and a heartening story. We'll tell it to you next.
And, but you're not going to tell it to you next on this show because I am tired and I am done. So Kevin Michael Grace, he could bring passion and enthusiasm and new ideas to every show, and I just can't. I can occasionally bring some passion, and occasionally I'll bring a new idea. But that's it for me for tonight. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.